So as Mayor, I'd like to welcome councillors, guests, members of the public and officers to this meeting of council. Just a reminder that there are no scheduled fire alarms this evening, so if the alarm sounds, please leave the building by the nearest exit. The meeting point is on Buckner Road. Please note that we have a lot of items and speakers to get through tonight. Therefore, it would be appreciated if members of council please keep their allotted times slots for speaking, which I'll highlight during the meeting, in order to ensure that all members get their chance to speak. Before we begin, I'd like to welcome Fiona Connolly to her first meeting of full council as acting chief executive. I'd also like to welcome our 3 new councillors following the 2nd of May and 4th of July by-elections, Councillor Emma Nye, Councillor Sarah Cole and Councillor Dominic Armstrong. Please be welcome this evening and we look forward to working with you. It would also be remiss of me not to comment on the 4th of July general election, where I took on my role as returning officer for the constituencies of Clapham and Brixton Hill, Dulwich and West Norwood, Streatham and Croydon North, and Vauxhall and Camberwell Green. I saw the work that was undertaken by hundreds of staff to ensure a smooth and well-organised election process. So I'd like to thank all members of staff and all of those present on the night of the election for ensuring a good and healthy democratic process. Our members of parliament following the election for the 4 wards representing Lambeth are Bel Ribeiro Addy MP for Clapham and Brixton Hill, Helen Hayes MP, Dulwich and West Norwood, Steve Reid MP, Streatham and Croydon North, and Florence Eshalomi MP, Vauxhall and Camberwell Green. So congratulations to all of our members of parliament. It's now time to move on to the first item of business on the agenda tonight, which is declarations of interest. Does any councillor wish to make a declaration of interest on any business before the council meeting tonight? No. Cool. Thank you. The next item of business is to agree the minutes of the last meeting. Are the minutes of the annual council meeting held on the 24th of April 2024 agreed as a correct record, subject to amendments set out in the order paper? Thank you. The minutes from the 24th of April 2024 are agreed. Apologies for absence have been set out on the order paper. If there are any more, please advise Democratic Services after the meeting. I'll now take this opportunity to provide a very, very quick overview of engagements and events I've attended as mayor because of short on time. So I'll start with, I went viral on social media on a couple of videos that I've got about 2 million views, so that's quite cool. But I've also been around and visited some other really good organizations. So Certitude Mental Health Support, they had a really nice barbecue. And yesterday did some back the borough with a load of young people, hundreds of young people from primary schools across the borough, trying to promote healthy and active travel. So Councillor Hashi was there as well, which was really cool. And Councillor English Jones and also Councillor Malcolm Clark as well. So it was good to see them there. We'll now turn to the next item on the agenda, which is deputations and petitions. Council will receive 2 deputations this evening. The first deputation will be on the negative impact of large-scale commercial events on Brockwell Park's nature, grounds and users. So please can Jen Chambers, Lucy Ackrill, Jonathan Hanrick please come to the front of the dais, please. Sorry for the delay. Coming. Welcome, guys. So, welcome, Jen Chambers, Lucy Ackroyd, Jonathan Hanrick. You have 5 minutes to address council. Once finished, please wait for a response from the cabinet member. Okay, thanks.
Events and downsizing the Lambeth Country Show, which are having a negative impact on the local community and ecology. Brockwell Park's original conveyance states that the public should have free, unrestricted use of the park. Why is this no longer the case? Our open letter, sent to you in May and signed by more than 4,000 people, called for an immediate halt to plans to fell or reduce 44 trees during nesting season to facilitate large commercial events. This presents an opportunity for you to embrace the community's love of the park's trees and community engagement in their care. The issue received national press coverage and was a key question at local election hustings. It will remain a key central issue if no positive action is taken. We acknowledge the preceding communication disaster and the alteration to those plans. We have also launched a new petition regarding our concern for the impact of large festivals on the park, which has garnered over 2,200 signatures in 2 weeks. This is included in our documents alongside numerous stories from the individuals we have spoken with in the community that emphasise the importance of what we're calling for. A mum living in Parkview Heights who signed the petition dreads the festivals as they deprive her children of local park space. Like so many others, 1 in 3 Lambeth households, she has no garden and she relies on the Herne Hill side of the park to make sure her young children have clean air, exercise and outdoor play close to her house and the amenities of Herne Hill. She and many others instead suffer the oppressive noise and pollution from HGVs, generators and the events themselves, night and day. A statement from the St Matthew's Project reads, "Due to the damage caused by the Pokemon event last summer, we were unable to play any 11-a-side home games at Brockwell Park and had to play the entire 2024 season at Clapham Common. While we were extremely grateful to park management for securing us a pitch at Clapham Common, losing home advantage, having to escort players to Clapham and transport necks and corner flags was far from ideal. Due to the further damage caused by this summer's events, it's looking unlikely we'll be back this season. This is about much more than a football pitch. We've played matches at Brockwell since 2005 and it's our home, a place where many young SNP members identify with. As secondary objectives, we ask, will you commit to a transparent survey of the event site's biodiversity and trees following the 2024 events? Could you ensure that there will be a mitigation strategy to avoid the impact of ground compaction on tree roots, which leads to poor health and death? Will you commit to a survey by an independent expert as to whether compaction has led to loss of trees on site? In light of Lambeth's event guidelines, which state that only 10% of Brockwell should be enclosed for entertainment, could you commit to this percentage in your 2024 to 2029 event strategy? This amount would lessen the negative impact on people's amenity during events. Will you commit to a more appropriate maximum number of days of site closure? This year, the site was closed for 36 days rather than the 17 mentioned in the organisers' planning permission, or the 28-day maximum permitted for temporary change of use. A large section of the park is still fenced off and out of bounds weeks after the event's finished. Will you commit to a full transparent account for all operations in Brockwell Park? It's been argued that the festival site lacks biodiversity. This is debatable, not inevitable or insurmountable. There are some excellent biodiversity projects in the rest of the park, but they already compete with usable open space. Especially this summer, as much of the festival site remains bare of grass. Environmental commitments underpin much council strategy. Commercial festivals in their current form undermine the excellent work to plant new trees. In answering our questions, we invite you to put forward a different vision for event management going forward. As the climate crisis worsens, this has never been more important. Brockwell Park is our community's lungs. where people come together and connect with nature. We look forward to a strategy that will enhance the park's community and environment. Thank you.
Thank you. So just stay where you are, while a response is provided by Councillor Donatus Anyanwu, Cabinet Member for Stronger Communities. Councillor Anyanwu, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for your deputation. Events are integral to showcasing Lambert's unique cultural identity and heritage. We have many award-winning parks, which are enjoyed all year round. Our parks and open spaces have always hosted some of the biggest names in the music industry, as well as significant charity events that raise millions for important causes. I have said before, the income that we bring in from events allows us to maintain and improve our vital open space despite over 14 years of austerity that was brought in by the previous government, Conservative, and the Liberal Democrats. Whilst many residents welcome, and they do welcome, and participate in the cultural events in the parks, some residents, of course, have raised concerns around events held in Lambert's Park, as you're doing now. And we have worked hard over the years to respond to those concerns and mitigate them. For example, events in Brockway Park were moved to early May so that we can compress them together so that the parks is free for further events across the summer. The park is a vital source for natural biodiversity, recreation, and health, which we absolutely admit. As such, we are committed to ensuring Lambert's residents continue to have access to diverse and meaningful range of events, which will stabilize the core of our values. With our event policy, we try to minimize disturbances throughout all our events. For example, with protective barriers around sensitive locations, and we adjust the site boundaries, including lighting and generators used to minimize disturbances to wildlife. The council always ensure the event organizers have a robust environmental management and mitigation program in place. They do to deal with the impacts which
that's your time.
Grossly and the cost of any repairs are made by them. The events do generate incomes. We try to mitigate the difficulties caused by the weather, which in the
sorry, I'm going to ask you to stop because we have a really packed agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just finished to say we will constantly to minimize the.
Sorry. But thank you for your deputation. You've heard from the cabinet member, so I'd like to ask if you could leave the chamber. Thank you. The second and final deputation will be on encouraging Lambeth Council to transition to 100% internal plant-based catering to align with their climate commitments and their signing of the plant-based treaty last year. Please can Polly Foreman, Ed McNutt and Louise Hillwood come to the front of the dais, please. Thank you. Wait, hold on 1 second before you start. I just want to say welcome to the chamber. You're going to have 5 minutes, and then when you're finished, you'll hear a response from the cabinet member. Thank you.
devastating wildfires and floods, extreme heat and crop failures, all as a result of global heating. In the UK in April, farmers said we are facing a crisis due to unprecedented and constant rain. Rising carbon and methane emissions from animal farming, along with habitat destruction and degradation of waterways due to animal agriculture, are driving both the climate and the biodiversity crises. In London, 27% of food emissions come from meat, while providing only 5% of the volume of food consumed by Londoners. Lambeth Council has set out to be a climate protection leader by showing support for a transition to plant-based catering, the first of the London boroughs to sign the Plant-Based Treaty in 2023. According to Lambeth Council's Climate Action Plan from 2022, the food goal is to increase the consumption of healthy plant-based food in Lambeth through procurement power, individual and organisational choices. This advocacy and the signing of the Plant-Based Treaty demonstrates that Lambeth Council knows the importance of plant-based eating to protect ours and our planet's health. In 2019, the IPCC stated that reducing meat consumption is a substantial opportunity to mitigate climate change, because plant-based sources of protein produce up to 70% less greenhouse gas emissions than meat. If Londoners reduce their meat intake by 70%, it would cut London's consumption-based emissions by 20%. Regarding this and the increase in education of the health benefits of a plant-based diet, there is growing support from Londoners for plant-based foods. Lambeth has a number of plant-based businesses that are thriving due to the support from residents for both plant-based foods and products. Also, King's College Hospital promoted veganuary this year, and resident doctors are currently promoting No Meat May. This shows that healthcare professionals agree with the transition to a plant-based food system to better protect their patients from chronic diseases like cardiovascular disease and diabetes. Many councillors here amongst us have actively promoted this movement towards a diet in line with health and planetary goals. Lambeth Council has the chance to be a leader and protect its constituents from the negative effects of climate change and disease. I hope that the Council can build on the signing of the Plant-Based Treaty in October by fully meeting its demands and stop participating in the consumption of animal products and continue to promote plant-based foods and businesses to its constituents. The first step, and the one we are asking you to consider today, is to commit to 100% plant-based catering for internal meetings and events. By announcing a transition to 100% plant-based catering, Lambeth Council will set an example for the positive changes required to mitigate the most devastating effects of climate change caused by animal farming. Thank you.
Thank you. So yeah, just stay there while the response is provided by Councillor Jackie Dyer, Cabinet Member for Healthier Communities. Councillor Dyer, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you for this deputation. Lambeth Council is absolutely recognises that a transition to more plant-based foods is vital to food sustainability and tackling climate change, as well as a healthy diet, which is why we formally endorsed the principles of the Plant-Based Treaty earlier this year. Food agriculture is a leading carbon emitter, accounting for 1/3 of global greenhouse gases, linked half of human-induced biodiversity loss. Measures are already taken include launching a fruit and veg on prescription program to boost fruit and vegetables consumption for people on low incomes, and a project to improve the quality of food for sale around schools. Through our partnerships with organisations such as the Healthy Living Platform and Eat Like a Londoner, we are helping residents access healthier diets with a focus on plant-based foods. Furthermore, as part of our Lambeth Biodiversity Action Plan, we are continuing to work with community groups to promote the establishment of new and appropriate community gardens. And as part of our Climate Action Plan, we are supporting businesses that prioritise sustainable agricultural practices. We are still exploring further options for how we can best implement the principles of the treaty. At this stage, we cannot commit to 100% internal plant-based catering. However, we are looking to reduce the animal products that we use at council-run facilities and events. And we use our social media to promote local vegan businesses such as Pipico, Bonington Cafe and the Peachy Goat. More generally, we at the council are proud of the work we are doing on food issues. Not only were we the first London borough to endorse the plant-based treaty, we were also the first London borough to sign up to the local authority declaration on healthier food and sugar reduction, and one of the first London boroughs to sign the food purchasing commitment to improve the food we serve and cut waste. This year, our commitment to healthy and sustainable food initiatives was recognised with a leadership award from the environmental charity Sustain. Thank you again for bringing this deputation to the council.
Thank you for your deputation. You can return to your seat now. Thank you. So thank you for all the deputations presented this evening. Written responses will be sent within 10 days. I will now accept petitions from councillors. Please indicate by raising your hand if you have a petition to present. When called on, please just state two things: the number of signatures and the petition title, no lengthy speeches. Please note, if a petition is not received in accordance with the council's petition scheme, it will be rejected. Democratic Services will collect the petitions, so please remain seated. So, hands up. Oh, Councillor McGivern.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have 91 signatures calling for the immediate reopening of the 3G pitch at Agnes Riney Gardens, known locally as Poinders Park. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Good evening. I've got a petition from 25 residents of Culverhouse Gardens and nearby streets highlighting the issue of local traffic volume and speeding.
Thank you. Any hands? Oh, Councillor George.
Signatures from groups and companies from the residents of Shakespeare Road for the use of that area. Thank you.
Thank you. Any others? Cool. Thank you, everyone. The next item is the cabinet statement. Councillor Claire Holland, you have 5 minutes to address council.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And as you said, it's an absolute pleasure to welcome 3 new councillors here to full council tonight. So I would like to repeat the welcome to Dom Armstrong and Sarah Cole, newly elected in Streatham Common and Vale. And congratulations and welcome back to Councillor Emma Nye. I know that you will all serve your wards and this council with the commitment and the hard work that our residents deserve. Mr. Mayor, on the 4th of July, we saw the election of the fantastic councillor Jim Dixon in Dartford, and I know he will be a passionate and committed member of Parliament. I'm extremely grateful to him for his dedication and work as a cabinet member in recent years, driving forward major achievements on health integration and mental health provision in particular. And I want to thank him on behalf of the entire council for that service as he stands down from his cabinet role. I'm pleased to announce that Councillor Tim Windle will step up in his place, bringing a wealth of experience at both Deputy Cabinet and Cabinet level, and also from his own personal and professional experience in health. I'm delighted to announce that Councillor Issa will also be stepping up into a Deputy Cabinet role, utilising his experience in resident engagement to continue with our housing improvement journey. And finally, I'm delighted to share that Councillor McGivern will be stepping into the policy lead role, expanding her fantastic work on age-friendly Lambeth. Mr. Mayor, it was an absolute pleasure last night to welcome community organisations, activists, councillors and residents to our fantastic Lambeth Pride reception. It was a brilliant event which enabled us to reflect on Lambeth's proud history of radical activism fighting for the rights of the LGBTQ+ community. It was fitting that it was held here in our Assembly Hall because this was used by the Gay Liberation Front in the 1970s for their fundraising discos to support their work that laid the foundation for today's movement. And we also celebrated Rachel Webb, who was, to our knowledge, the first trans councillor elected in the UK back in 1986 for the then Ferndale ward. Today, as then, Lambeth is proud of our diversity and we are committed to fighting for equity and justice for all. That commitment is at the heart of everything we do as a council, and it is why our Labour Group motion tonight commits to backing the new national government's transformative 5-year plan for LGBTQ+ rights. And we have already seen today the difference that Labour Empower makes with their proposed ban on conversion therapy. Mr. Mayor, the reason I am able to stand and talk about the new government's commitment to LGBTQ+ rights is because of the resounding Labour election victory on the 4th of July. A proud moment for all of us who have campaigned to end the 14 years of Conservative and Liberal Democrat governments that have wrecked public services and ignored communities like ours. Speaking to people across the borough and across the country whilst out campaigning, there is a real appetite for change, for a government who will listen and take action to improve our NHS and local services, make our streets safer, deliver affordable housing and tackle the climate crisis. Now, these are all areas that Lambeth Council has already been making a real difference on, from taking radical action on reducing carbon emissions and making our neighbourhoods greener and safer, to building the first new council homes in a generation. But without a government that listens or supports us, it is often felt like we've had to tackle these challenges with both hands tied behind our back. Now, we all know it will not be easy to reverse the dire impact of 14 years of austerity. Our council alone has faced cuts of over £250 million since 2010, and we find ourselves in an increasingly precarious position as a result, and tough choices needed about our budgets this year. These challenges will not be fixed quickly, colleagues, but we will work hard to lobby the new government to take action where it can. I'm very pleased that we've already had visits from the Chancellor and the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government to see Lambeth's fantastic delivery record on planning, affordable housing and place shaping. Our council's message to the new government is clear. We stand ready with our experience and our expertise to work in partnership with them, to remedy the issues of the past, to meet the challenges of the future and work together to deliver the change that our borough so desperately needs. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Holland. We'll now move on to the majority opposition statement. Councillor Donna Harris, you have 3 minutes to address council.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Having stood in the general election, I know just how hard Lambeth officers and volunteers work to support the sport of it. It's only right that we acknowledge them. In particular, the efforts on polling day for those who got up at the crack of dawn to prepare for polling stations, to those who carried out the count, keeping us candidates company into the small hours. Those efforts should be commended by us all. Well done and thank you to everyone. It was a hugely successful election for the Liberal Democrats, our best result in 101 years, an increase of 61 seats over 2019. We now have 72 fantastic Lib Dem MPs. Our South West London stronghold has expanded and the gaps are closing. I must also, of course, congratulate the Labour Party on its victory in this election. But Labour shouldn't be complacent. It may dominate the new House of Commons, but its vote share increased only by 1.6%, whilst having won 63% of the seats on only 34% of the vote. Yet again, this only proves electoral reform is needed both locally and nationally if we are to give voters what they actually want. Labour cannot blame the Tories anymore. The UK government, the Mayor of London, Lambeth Council are a Labour trinity. It's my job as leader of the opposition to lead scrutiny of this council, a council that can have no more excuses. With that said, this evening we'll be addressing, some would say, the not so successful transition to LACT of Lambeth, and we'll also address Lambeth's failing housing service in our motion. And I cannot stand here and fail to mention the dreadful destruction that recently occurred in Brockwell Park. The Liberal Democrat group have asked for a full independent inquiry. We would also like to see a citizens' assembly with both residents and stakeholders. This would provide a clear path forward, securing both trust and sustainability. It is important that we do not lose the country show or the opportunity to bring people together with inclusive events. However, it needs to work for all, including Brockwell Park itself. Voters up and down the country and here in Lambeth have placed their trust in you, Labour. They have given Labour all the levers of power. However, they want to be rewarded with meaningful improvements to council services. It's time to show us clear, measurable outputs that improve those voters' lives. Now the hard work really begins, nationally and locally. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. We'll now move on to the next item of business, which is councillor questions. 25 minutes is set aside for supplementary questions and answers. Can I remind councillors to keep answers and supplementary questions short and concise to enable us to get through as many questions as possible in the time allocated. The first question is from Councillor Donna Harris to Councillor Danny Adilipur. Councillor Harris, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Councillor Adlipur, for your response. I'd like to also ask the Cabinet member to provide justification for applying a 16.5% management fee on those energy costs, given that the administration effort does not increase with rising energy prices. Will he commit to reviewing this practice as well as potentially refunding residents for this overcharge? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Adilipur, can you provide a response, please?
Thank you, Councillor Harris, for your supplementary question. Of course, whenever we look at management charges, we're careful to keep them as low as possible, only to cover the costs of the service that they are providing. As I addressed in my initial response to you, we have had huge increases in energy costs over the last few years, but also increased need to engage with our residents to support them in paying those bills, which led to additional resources being needed to be targeted at those services. Of course, we regularly review and look at those charges. I'm more than happy to do so again, but our priority remains, as it always has been, to provide the best possible services for the lowest possible cost, and that's what we'll continue to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nicole Griffiths, do you have a supplementary question? Thank you. Councillor Emma Nye, do you have a supplementary question?
Hi, we're all aware of the lack of action to support private renters over the last 14 years of Tory rule that was ushered in by the Lib Dems. How confident are you that the new Labour government will allow a greater crackdown on rogue landlords and more support for private renters?
Thank you, Councillor Hashi. Provide a response.
Thank you very much, Councillor Emma, and welcome back. As a council, we believe good quality housing is a fundamental human right, and that's why it's central to our borough plan ambition to make Lambeth a place we can all call home. Currently, Lambeth is one of the most deprived boroughs in London in terms of housing affordability, overcrowding and homelessness. 8th deprived in London and the 22nd most deprived in England. Private renting is often the only option residents who can't access social housing and aren't able to purchase their own property have. The Labour Party is resolutely committed to the reforming the private rented sector, and some of the key policies related to this sector include the abolishment of Section 21, driving up standards, house building and new towns, and warm homes plan. To aid in this area, on top of the government's mandatory licensing scheme, we have introduced a borough-wide additional HMO licensing scheme to ensure safety standards for privately rented tenants in properties of 3 or more unrelated people. And from September 2024, we will, the first phase of selective licensing will come into force. Where the Conservatives have failed to address issues, Labour are driving up standards within private rented homes. As well as abolishing Section 21, the Labour Party will extend AWAB's law to the private rented sector. This law was originally introduced into the social sector in July 2023, following one-year-old AWAB's Ishaq's passing. Labour has also made a manifesto commitment to get Britain building again, with a pledge of 1.5 million new homes over the next parliament. Letting agents saw fewer homes available for tenants in 2023. Many local authorities have highlighted a significant and growing problem with rogue landlords. These landlords target vulnerable tenants and often place them in overcrowded and poorly maintained accommodation. In some places, there has been an increase in the use of outbuildings as accommodation. While we appreciate the housing situation is hard for all at the moment, we also appreciate that no one deserves to live in a premises that adversely affects their health and well-being, both mentally and physically. We will continue to seek to strike a right balance over helping landlords and protecting tenants, but we remain committed that the private rented sector in Lambeth is a place where people want to call home and be a place that is fit for purpose. So in answer to your question, yes.
Thank you, Councillor Hashi. Councillor Martin Bailey, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the work being done to celebrate creative arts in Lambeth, but my question was more focusing on making sure that Lambeth, its history, culture, people and stories are being celebrated in and through the creative arts. Will the creative economy strategy of 2025 include this? And what consultation opportunities will there be for members to contribute as well?
Thank you, Councillor Anyanwu. Can you please provide a response?
Thank you, Councillor Bailey. Thanks for your question. Yes, the creative economy strategy will not only be focused on celebrating the creative arts in the borough, but will also champion Lambeth's history, culture, people, and its stories. We want Lambeth to be the best place to run a creative business. Of course, we are currently the hub of creative industry in not only in London, but in the country. So as such, we will refresh our creative economy strategy, which will not only lay out our commitment to the creative industry for the next 5 years, we will also launch a creative business survey to get insight into the current realities facing Lambeth's creative industries. This survey is for businesses and organizations in Lambeth working in relation to cultural creative industry, making it open at all ends between June and will be available till the end of August. We are eager to hear your views, including, I know, in your area, you are very passionate about creative industry, particularly around Vauxhall area, Oval to Waterloo. So it's absolutely crucial that we hear your view and experiences. We know the sector continues to evolve to meet persistent and emerging challenges and opportunities. So your response will help us ensure that our strategy reflects the creative needs and aspiration of everyone who works and lives in the borough. Please do let me know your thoughts, and I will make sure that help us to shape the future economy. And I have to say, we want to work in relation to creative industry from school to adulthood, and then also helping individuals to gain employment through our creative industry. So the economy will be absolutely key, and your view will be key, helping us, including what we're doing within our Elevate and other activities we're doing to be the core area for creative activities, as I said, not only in London, but in the country. Thank you very much for your question.
Thank you, Councillor Anyanwu. Councillor Judith Kavanagh, do you have a supplementary question?
Hi, thank you for your answer. In addition to the annual Break the Borough, what else is the council doing to support families to feel more confident in choosing to cycle to school?
Councillor Chowdhury, could you please provide a response?
Thank you, Councillor Kavanagh. Thank you very much for that question. And as if by magic, I have a list that I'd like to read out of all the things that we'll be doing. So we now have an officer in the Transport Education and Campaigns Officer role who's working on school travel plans, and with Transport for London on the Travel for Life programme, encouraging schools to work with their communities to travel more actively. We also offer bikeability cycle training to all schools. We encourage schools to engage in initiatives such as the Big Wheel and Walk and Street Tag, which add a competitive element to active travel to schools. We offer schools bike markets. We've provided cycle parking to some some schools when funding has allowed. We're working with Wheels for Wellbeing to provide specialist bikes and training for SEND children to be able to access the cycle training offer. We're working especially with school streets, schools to provide active travel initiatives to help with the transition. We've been bringing the Our Bike scheme to school fairs and giving out free trial vouchers to encourage cargo bike use during the school run. In secondary schools, we're working with Upcycle to provide fix your bike sessions to encourage a bike passion. And we also have secondary school specific cycle training offer. I hope that suffices.
Thank you. Councillor Issa, do you have a supplementary question? Okay, thank you. Councillor Durgis and Swain Jameson are not present tonight, so we'll move on. Councillor Matthew Bryant, do you have a supplementary question?
Yep, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Keeping our residents safe is obviously one of the core responsibilities of the council. Can the Cabinet Member for Stronger Communities provide a timescale for the completion of the review that he's undertaking into the safety of fun fairs in the borough? And can he commit to publishing the report arising from this review on the council's website?
Thank you. Councillor Anyanu, can you please provide a response?
Thank you very much for your question. Unfortunately, as people are aware, we had incident that happened at our beloved country show that relates to misfunctioning of a ride. And as people know, the country show has been going on for 50 years. And an incident that occurred, which is unfortunate, occurred because of that manufacturing of it. However, the investigation is ongoing, and the investigation is done by health safety executive and with the police. So it is ongoing, and we haven't received any report because they themselves are the ones responsible for investigating what has happened. We take every incident seriously. We will work with HSE and the police after they've given us the investigation and then given us the report, and they will inform us the way where they will want those reports to be published and shared. We are committed to investigating it ourselves, but also we will be absolutely working with partners to make sure we mitigate other possibilities of reoccurrence. So we are working with officers to see additional things we will put in place to make sure that we are absolutely certain things are checked properly. I'm not, the officers do look at reports given to us by producers and organizations. In that sense, we wait for the investigation to finish, and after that, I will let you know what it is all about.
Thank you. Councillor Costa, do you have a supplementary question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Cowell, for your response. My supplementary question is, how many electors were turned away at polling stations due to lack of ID, and how many used voter authority certificates for both the GLA and the general election, and whether this information is sent to the Electoral Commission? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cowell, could you please provide a response?
Thank you, Councillor Costa. The figures of both of those are yet to be made available. In terms of the GLA election, the Greater London Authority is the electoral authority for this rather than our own democratic services running the election. So they're privy to that. We're due to get a report from democratic services on what happens in the general election, but we also too are very aware that there's some very concerning information we've revealed by the Unlock Democracy campaign of hundreds of thousands of voters across the country being turned away, and there may be soft barriers to look at as well. We'll make those figures available and also to as well provide a report to the Equality and Justice Commission to see, after the experience of both of these elections this year, which has obviously been quite significant, whether there's lessons to be learned in particular about the Lambeth situation that may be relevant to feed into the national picture. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Bryan, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor, and thanks, Councillor Hashi, for your answer. Whilst any investment in the town centre team by the Metropolitan Police is to be welcome, some may be concerned that it needs to go a little bit further. Will the council commit to continuing to encourage the Metropolitan Police to invest in the town centre team and expand it to adjacent areas?
Thank you. Councillor Hashi, could you please provide a response?
Thank you very much, Councillor Bryan. And whilst we are keen to work in partnership with the police, we all know this can only happen if the police are prepared to offer the resources to properly dedicate to Brixton Town Centre. Our council officers rely on the support of their police colleagues to assist in enforcement matters. And in public, we require sergeants and police officers to have a sustained presence in Brixton and the adjacent areas. However, all too often, the police have failed to publicly reassure residents and the council cannot continue to take responsibility for enforcement response to criminal activities, a duty that ultimately falls within police powers. As such, I would like to assure you that the council actively continues to encourage the Met to properly resource the town centre. I walk through the town centre regularly with senior police officers to remind them of what businesses and residents are having to endure. An increase in fear, crime and a lack of police visibility have all contributed to the current climate. But I would also like to remind colleagues that in 2010, the year the Conservative Lib Dem coalition took power, there were 79,500 police staff working in forces across England and Wales. By March 2016, this number had dropped to 61,668, a 23% decimation of police numbers, with the Met being the worst affected, losing 3,000 police jobs. At this moment in time, we are encouraging the local police that we need a visible presence in the town centre at least once a day, with a minimum of 2 police officers and touch points at Brixton Library to support relationship building. The council is very clear in its position that the priority is that the police need to ensure they have a sustained team within Brixton and commit to expanding this team with permanent staff. However, this does not mean we as a council are doing nothing. We have developed an on-street engagement team to support people with substance misuse. This service has been operational since November 2023 and is delivered by Thames Reach. And the role of the team is to build relationships, a better understanding of the needs of the people who are using the drugs and to support them to access treatment. We also have our highways team who have maintained an enforcement presence in Brixton Town Centre to tackle issues around littering and street urination. To date, they have given in excess of 600 fixed penalty notices within Brixton Town Centre. Our highways enforcement team have also worked alongside planning and sustainability division to tackle the escalation of e-bikes that we all see every day. Officers have started enforcement practices by attending areas where these e-bikes are causing a clear obstruction and logging this. The companies responsible then remove these bikes, but we're currently looking and reviewing with an exploration of potentially finding these organisations who renege on their responsibility. So in answer to your question, yes.
Thank you, Councillor Hashi. Councillor Ainsley, do you have a supplementary question?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Chowdhury, for your answer. I feel as though the answer is only half complete, however. I mean, we've heard tonight from the deputation that they want a full, transparent account of the events that go on Brockwell Park. The part of the question that I think remains unanswered is, sorry, Donatis. It was an environmental question. I'm so sorry. Donatis, I'm so sorry. Thank you for your answer. And I just wondered, the part of the question that remains unanswered is, have we gone too far with the over-commercialisation of Brockwell Park? And could we have a review of that, given what we've heard from the deputation tonight? And although the answer suggested that the part of the park that was not ecologically diverse, it's shutting off a whole part of the park where our families can picnic during what looks like some good weather that's coming. So could I have an answer on the over-commercialisation and a review of that, please? Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Anyanu, can you please provide a response?
Thank you. I'm absolutely happy to be related to Regina. Look, the answer is our events are at the heart of what our cultural consumption is in this borough. Those events looked at what we are, whether we're talking about our African Caribbean population in relation to events that relate to them, whether it is for our LGBTQ plus population, whether it is for other community groups that enjoy few days that we have events in the park with our partners. The events in the park only occupy 35% of the park. The 65% of the remaining part is open for the public use. So those events, as I was suggesting, raises money that actually help us to build in relation to our ecological maintenance of the park. The biodiversity we have in Brockwell Park is as a result of investment that being generated from those events. So I don't know what you talk about over commercialization. What I care about is how we take resources, maintain our parks to continue being a green flag winning parks. As my colleagues here will tell you, we celebrate an additional winning of those flags. And another one I have to tell you is, don't get it from us, get it from RSPB, who said Brockwell Park currently is the best place for butterflies and birds. And that is again as a result of investments in the park and the work we are doing to sustain those. Our open space, as this administration is concerned, as we work to maintain our residents enjoying those spaces, they often come in when there are events. For us, if we talk about justice and equity, is to make sure those spaces are available for those communities that often do not have a look in until those events occur. I am absolutely proud of what we are doing to share our space with our culture, to share our space with our equality issues, to make sure our events is inclusive as it could be, and to use that resources to open it during the country show that actually saves the council money and then also free for our residents to enjoy. If you sit over there and thinking that over commercialization of the park is dangerous to investment of the park, then I think you are hypocritical in your approach to making sure our communities share the culture that belongs to all of us and the space that belongs to all of us. That's my answer to you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Serena De Silva, do you have a supplementary question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, I'm thoroughly happy with the response from Councillor Hashi, so no supplementary.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rebecca Spencer, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I do. Thank you. We have already presented presentations from pupils and parents at Elmwood School on this topic. It's great the Carnac Street crossing can be considered given the huge traffic danger to children. Is it also possible to have them on Vale Street and Clive Road too? And what power do the Healthy Routes team have to sign these off?
Thank you. Councillor Chowdhury, could you please provide a response?
Thank you, Councillor Spencer. So development work for phase 4 of the Brockwell Park to Gypsy Hill Healthy Route will be carried out from autumn 2024 into 2025, and as part of this work we'll be considering pedestrian and cycling enhancements along the whole corridor of the route, including Vale Street and Clive Road. The transport team will be seeking feedback from Lambeth residents as part of the development work, and I know they look forward to working with the local community to make sure that the area is the best it can be for active travel.
Thank you. Maybe it's my naivety as a new chair, but at one point I really thought we were going to make it through all those questions, but unfortunately the 25 minutes has run out. So we're going to move on to the new reports. Move on to the reports that are listed at item 9 on the agenda. The first report this evening is the Constitution 2024-2025. We will hear from Councillor Scott Ainsley, Councillor Donna Harris and Councillor Scarlett O'Hara. Councillor Ainsley, you have 3 minutes.
Well, that's it. Okay. This administration has been defensive for many years, but these changes to the Constitution are the first indication of how it's about to get much worse. There are several deeply worrying changes, but the most incredible and brazen is the draconian move to disallow motions on international affairs. This is an absolute knee-jerk reaction to our motion on ceasefire in Gaza and proof that when Labour leadership feel threatened by discourse, and in this case, discourse that Lambeth residents have told us does matter, they immediately close ranks and shut up shop. In fact, Labour are so reactive, they don't actually know what they think. When we put forward our motion, other Labour-led councils had already passed these ceasefire motions, and shortly after, national Labour leadership came out in support of an immediate ceasefire. This didn't stop Lambeth Labour from suspending their members who voted to protect human rights and international law. Labour now tell us that we shouldn't talk about these events because they're not relevant. But what about the motions they authored or supported, for example, on Ukraine, apartheid or reparations? Are they no longer relevant? They might also say that they are exceptions, but their non-exhaustive list gives councillors an incomplete picture of how muzzled we are. You get to decide ultimately. And now the Chief Whip wants to also decide which deputations will be heard. This from someone who previously claimed Labour ranks were so diverse there was no need for more opposition scrutiny of committees. But what use is any diversity of background when there's no diversity of thought? You can have any thought you like as long as it's Lambeth Labour's. This is a dangerous and controlling behaviour. Now, Labour have also used this opportunity to update the cabinet housing portfolio to reflect their reimagination of their role as a commercial landlord rather than a provider of council housing. We are seeing repetition of misleading concepts like genuinely affordable, sustainable growth and tenants that are designed to sound like a progressive proposition. In fact, these conceal a lack of real commitment to council housing, social housing, a corrupted planning system and a dismissal of residents' rights to a home in the right place at the right price. The financial portfolio has also been edited to remove a commitment to lobby the government for cost of living funding support. I mean, are we not allowed to ask this government for more money for the most unequal society and the most shamefully unequal inequality gap that exists in this country? This is an escalation of your strategy to silence opposition voices and free speech, and reveals the defensive siege mentality of a one-party state that this council desperately needs to shake itself from.
Councillor Ainsley, your time's up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Harris, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Liberal Democrat Group support the change in the Constitution that reflects on foreign affairs. It's important to note that this change does not inhibit us from freedom of speech in regards to commenting on matters that directly touch our constituents, even if those are of overseas element. That's how it should be. We must be able to represent our residents in the best way possible. The point of the change is to stop commenting on issues that are outside our remit as a local authority and spending time on issues that are for MPs to debate. When councils adopt on foreign policy affairs issues, as we have seen recently here in Lambeth, constituents have shown frustration and annoyance and their councillors and see their councillors as wasting time on matters they have no control over. And they question why we're not devoting that time to issues that directly affect them. Fundamentally, that means public services, the things they elected us to run properly. A council that comments on general matters of foreign policy or in situations in other countries risks looking self-indulgent and all too often slips into larger party political positions that have nothing to do with the council's role. We have seen that these statements to score party political points have made a negative impact here, increasing abuse and harassment for some councillors. We are all aware we live in a world where democratic countries are seeing a rise in political violence. That is unacceptable for all concerned in public life, but it's entirely unnecessary for us to invite that kind of danger where it is absolutely not needed. On the questions of deputation, which on the constitutional changes clarifies, in reality, there isn't any great departure from past practice. However, I will say that we will look to monitoring officers and democratic services to ensure that the selection process is fair and that there is no politicisation of the choices of deputations going forward. Finally, I note that again, the question of members' allowances being taken under the same item as the Constitution. The Liberal Democrat Group believe this should be a separate item so that we can record our positions on these two distinct matters in a transparent way. As it now stands, we are forced to abstain or vote against, even if we actually support the constitutional changes, because they're being lumped together with members' allowances. One is how we do business, the other is how we are compensated for our efforts. Let's separate them in future. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor O'Hara, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. These two amendments bring clarity to areas of the Constitution and were discussed and agreed at Constitution Working Group, which includes a member of the opposition who agreed to and amended the changes. The Greens opposite want to suggest that the change to the Constitution around motions is an assault on free speech and a break from the proud traditions of Lambeth of standing up against injustice. But these changes do not preclude the council from making statements and taking action on injustice. They don't even prevent political groups from discussing matters of foreign affairs. Through motions, what they do is to set out the framework for which matters of foreign policy are within the remit of the council for motions to adhere to. After all, motions are a way for political groups to influence the work and position of the council. But we are local councillors, elected by local people to represent them on local issues. So this amendment leaves it open for the author to show how their motion is compatible with the council's responsibilities. It allows for debate on refugee provision, procurement of goods and services, factors affecting trade in the borough and so forth, all matters within the boundaries of Lambeth. Rather than shutting down debate, what this amendment enables is relevant discussion of the issues of residents that the council can affect, improve or change. And really, I will take no lectures from the Greens, who in January, after witnessing the abuse councillors and council staff received inside and outside this chamber, after seeing how unsafe some of our councillors were made to feel, particularly our female councillors, they had the nerve to ask for a recorded vote to further intimidate councillors in the performance of their democratic duty. It was shameful. And I make no apologies for supporting amendments that would prevent the Greens from cynically exploiting matters of foreign policy for local political gain. At the cost, thank you, but of the members' safety in this chamber. And there is also more empty outrage about the point of clarification in the Constitution on the process for the acceptance of deputations. Nothing has materially changed here. 3 deputations were allowed before this change, 3 are allowed after it. The criteria for acceptance is the same now as it was before. All that is being made clear with this amended wording is that on the rare occasions where there are more than 3 requests for deputations which all meet the necessary criteria, then exactly as happened before, Democratic Services, the Legal and Monitoring Officer and the Chief Whip agree on the 3 to take forward.
Thank you, Councillor.
And the Chief Whip carries a civic role for the Council as well as a role for Labour Group. She is part of the decision-making process and this fact hasn't changed either.
Thank you to all speakers. We will vote on this report later in the meeting. We will now turn to the review of allocation of seats and we'll hear from Councillor Nicole Griffiths, Councillor Ben Curtis and Councillor Scarlett O'Hara. Councillor Griffiths, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At the AGM in April, I raised my concerns about the makeup of the scrutiny committees, that the chairs and vice chairs are all Labour members. This administration claimed that diversity of talent within their group would more than make up for this lack of political mix. So, it appears, a diverse group of committee members are welcome on the scrutiny committees as long as they are Labour politicians. Yet another example of the Labour group's unrepresentative, undemocratic, echo chamber style of administration. Curtailing in-depth scrutiny of council decision-making and denying representation for the just under 50% of people that support other political parties across Lambeth. Scrutiny committee members are there to critically review and scrutinise council decisions and policies signed off by the Cabinet. The 4 scrutiny committees have a Labour group chair or vice chair, basically marking their own homework. Or to nick a line from elsewhere, this administration may as well just say, we thrive under a lack of accountability. We've consistently approached the administration to accept a Green Group councillor to at least be a vice chair on scrutiny. At no time has this been agreed, and the council, its leadership and Lambeth residents are the poorer for it. I'm one of 9 members allocated to the scrutiny committees, sitting on both overview and housing. As a councillor elected to represent local residents, I take my participation in these committees very seriously. They provide an opportunity to do a deep dive into decisions, strategies and policy, to hear from residents and organisations and to ask questions and follow up concerns directly to the officers and cabinet member responsible for the topic we are discussing. Last night, I was at a housing scrutiny meeting. The agenda topics were temporary accommodation and the private rental sector. Lead officers and witnesses were all in attendance. Temporary accommodation is one of the most urgent challenges that this council faces. In addition to the chair, out of the allocated 5 councillors, only 3 of us were in attendance, 2 Labour councillors and myself. The 2 who are missing didn't even nominate substitutes. This is beyond disappointing, as it demonstrates a level of indifference and lack of commitment to scrutiny from members of the Labour group that would have us believe otherwise and makes a mockery of the administration's claims. We were scrutinising very serious matters which affect so many of our residents. There is no acceptable excuse for not having a full committee last night. I hope that moving forward, we see a greater level of commitment to scrutiny from Labour members.
Yes, here.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll now hear from Councillor Curtis. You also have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you very much for your role as a returning officer in the general election, which I stood in. This paper is a rerun of the allocation of seats paper that was brought before the Chamber Annual Council and is obviously reflective of the by-elections that Labour have now won. And whilst I can repeat what I said at Annual Council, we've got much to get through this evening, and I know that my comments previously have been minuted, and thus I congratulate Labour and the new members in the Chamber. I will abstain on this as we did previously. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor O'Hara, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Tonight we welcome 3 new Labour councillors to the Chamber. Councillor Cole, Councillor Nye and Councillor Armstrong, who will all bring their dedication and talents to help improve the lives of residents in their wards. Consequently, the balance of Labour councillors to opposition councillors has changed and means that the makeup of our committees must also reflect this. However, in an ongoing spirit of generosity and openness, the Labour group again goes above and beyond in offering opposition members from both the 3-person Lib Dem main opposition and the 2-person Green minor opposition seats on pretty well every council committee, including all 4 scrutiny committees, and follows the guidance laid down in the Constitution. Despite the tangled logic from the opposition party, it is absolutely the case that the allocation of seats on committees is entirely fair, reasonable and generous, unless they want us to look at it again and withdraw the additional seats offered to them, because that is always an option.
Thank you, speakers. We will vote on this report later in the meeting. We now turn to the use of special urgency in respect of key decisions. We will hear from Councillor Nicole Griffiths, Councillor Matthew Bryant and Councillor Danny Adilipur. Councillor Griffiths, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This report lists one of the most expensive decisions the council has made in the last 12 months with significant impacts to residents, and the use of special urgency procedure has permitted the council to push it through without due public notification or member scrutiny. We have stated many times about the need for the council to improve its contract management practices and ensure efficiency and value for money for residents. This is proof of how failure to do so can be costly and limits the council's bargaining power. The council has had to walk away from its North of Borough repairs and maintenance contract with Fortum because it was, from the outset, a bad agreement. While councillors have been restricted from viewing the details of the commercial reasons the deal was concluded, it was clearly negotiated on an unsustainable premise. It is also common practice that a contract like this should have an early termination clause, while Fortum's did not have one until 2025. It is likely Fortum has walked away with a hefty cash payment because of it. Subsequently, the council has had to rush to fill the service gap and appoint Waits, the existing south of the borough repairs and maintenance provider, without following the usual tender and procurement process. Waits have had a history of bad performance, and while their key performance indicators may have shown some recent improvement, it is difficult to see how they will cope with servicing an area that has now ostensibly doubled. Waits has been paid handsomely to find out. They're charging Lambeth a mobilisation fee of over £85,000 and escaping any financial penalties for service failure in the first 9 months of their contract. What if Waits fails to deliver? Is there a backup plan? We have been assured that Waits is a core partner. Perhaps this is why they have been directly selected, again without tender, to deliver a separate retrofit contract. This was from a list that included 14 other potential partners, as well as one that has direct experience delivering retrofit in Lambeth. The decision report states that the first discussion with the Cabinet member was on the 29th of April 2024. Arguably, the Council was aware about problems with the Fortum contract for a lot longer. Even so, there was plenty of time to publish this decision with due public notice and a consultation period to allow members to ask for more details. The Chair of Overview and Scrutiny signed off on special urgency procedures on the 14th of June, yet there was a further delay of 6 days until the decision was finally published on the 20th of June. Is it that the decision is so urgent, or is it that the Council wants to sidestep scrutiny from opposition members and the public? It could be that Waits have Lambeth over a barrel, or it could be that this is genuinely the best outcome for residents. But it is impossible for us to know when these major decisions are made without transparency or oversight.
Thank you.
This is why I've asked for this to be brought to the Housing Scrutiny Committee, yet another example of how, without the work of opposition councillors, Labour would be forging ahead unchecked and making no effort to learn any.
We'll now hear from Councillor Bryant. You have 3 minutes.
Mr. Mayor, I'd add the Liberal Democrat voice to the concerns expressed by Councillor Griffiths about the award of the Northern Repairs contract to Waits without tender. When the council announced the 10 new contracts for the maintenance of its housing stock back in 2021, its news release boasted that the council has now ensured that it is not dependent on a single contractor for any service. This is now no longer the case. The entirety of the council's responsive repair service, with a value of £16 million per year, is now in the hands of a single contractor, Waits. This represents a significant risk to the council. And this is all the more concerning because when the original contracts were awarded in 2021, a reserve contract was awarded to Breyer Group for the Northern Responsive Repair Service. Now, the delegated decision report that Councillor Griffiths referred to, published on 24th of June, mentions that discussions were held with Breyer Group regarding them taking on the work originally awarded to Fortum. This would have obviated the need for the contract to have gone to Waits. However, little detail is provided as to why it was not possible to pursue this option. It would thus be helpful if, when he speaks, the Cabinet member could shed some light on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dillipur, you also have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have to say, I do find the logic being pursued by the opposition parties quite bizarre, given their previous stance on things. Previously, they criticise us for not doing enough to hold our contractors to account, and they say we're too slow to take difficult decisions when needed. Now that we are holding a contractor to account and taking a difficult decision quickly, they criticise us for doing so. Forgive me if I find that slightly baffling. To be clear about what has actually happened here, the contract with Fortum has faced significant challenges. They have struggled with commercial pressures, and we've been pushing some time to find a solution so that the needs of our residents are met. It has become clear recently through those conversations with Fortum that the best solution was to end that contract early. They were only willing and able to do so by agreeing an exit date at the end of this month. Therefore, the priority for us was ensuring that at the end of this month, another contractor is ready to step in, so there is no gap in service provision and we can carry on carrying out repairs for our residents. This kind of decision is exactly what the special urgency procedure is for, to take a decision quickly to avoid negative consequences for our residents. That is why the decision was taken. In terms of the question that came from Councillor Bryant, of course, we explored all of the options available to us in this narrow timeframe, which was talking to Waits and talking to Breyer as the reserve contractor. And it quickly became apparent that the only option that guaranteed a smooth transition at the end of this month was to award the contract to Waits. Nonetheless, I do share the concerns that yes, there is a monopoly now in place, which is why Waits have only been awarded this contract for a period of 2 years. They will be scrutinised, they will be held to account, as we've been doing with Fortum. And what I would kindly suggest to both the opposition parties is, instead of tying yourself in knots over policy and procedure, join us in doing what our residents want us to do. Hold our contractors to account, push them to deliver better, and improve our standards of services. That's what we'll be doing on this side of the House. Thank you.
Thank you, speakers. We will now turn to the Lambeth Independent Inquiry into Child Sex Abuse Action Delivery Plan Final Delivery Report, and we will hear from Councillor Scott Ainsley, Councillor Matthew Bryant and Councillor Claire Holland. Councillor Ainsley, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, as you all know, for the last 10 years since I've been a councillor, I have spoken directly to survivors of child abuse, and I've been asking them what their opinion of the ICSA report is, and they've said that they're not happy with it and that you'll be hearing from them in due course. So I think the report paper seems to suggest that the work of ICSA is complete, but there are concerns which remain. If I look specifically at Appendix A, Oversight and Assurance, it says that a protocol for information sharing on individual children was signed off in April 2021. The lead member is regularly updated on children missing from home or care, investigations, allegations made by children in care and their outcomes as part of fortnightly cabinet member briefings. The lead member is also informed about cases where there has been a serious incident notification. So can you just clarify? I mean, I did email earlier, and sorry, Councillor Curtis, that it was very late in the day. It's been a very busy couple of weeks. Sorry, Councillor Kind. Well, I'm having a great night tonight. Can you just go back to the substantive point? Have there been any serious incident notifications? And how do all councillors in here that are corporate parents get to find out about it? So also at 5.06, I welcome the fact, and I've been calling for this for a long time, that there will be a local government association corporate peer challenge for 2024. It's not good that we've almost waited 10 years for it, but good that it's coming nonetheless. Look, I've said many times that the Green Group have been given Lambeth's shameful history on this that we should all be advanced DBS checked, and we request that again formally today. We're all responsible, and we need to understand still whether social workers have manageable caseloads, and that children in Lambeth Care have a real say and are free to put forward their concerns. I mean, it's really difficult to know from this report whether things are genuinely better or worse or the same for the children in Lambeth Care. And again, I'm afraid I can't really find the answer to all those questions in this report. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now hear from Councillor Bryant. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As is appropriate, there was extensive discussion of this item at last week's Children's Services Scrutiny Subcommittee, so I'll keep my comments brief. I would like, first of all, to recognise the work of officers in ensuring that all of this action plan, 64 actions, have now been completed. However, this should not be an occasion for self-congratulation. Whilst it is positive that all 64 actions in the plan are now complete, we should never, ever forget the circumstances that led us to needing this action plan in the first place. As this item moves to business as usual, we need to make sure that these actions stay completed and that there is no backsliding. This item needs laser focus on it and continued vigilance by all members of this council. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Claire Holland, you also have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I present to full council tonight the final delivery report of Lambeth's ICSA action plan. On 27th of July 21, the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse, ICSA, published its detailed investigation report, Children in the Care of Lambeth Council, and made several findings about the failures of the council of the past and the causes which led to conditions whereby abuse was perpetrated. On behalf of all elected members and staff, I restate our sincere and heartfelt apology to all victims and survivors of abuse and neglect whilst in Lambeth's care. The council was responsible for their care and protection, but failed, with profound consequences, and we are deeply sorry for their experiences. Lambeth Council cooperated fully and transparently with ICSA, and in response to the report recommendations, we drew up and approved the ICSA Action Plan in December 2021. We established a comprehensive governance framework to ensure rigorous oversight, monitoring and assurance, both at a strategic and operational level. All action closures have been quality assured through the ICSA Delivery Assurance Board before sign-off. Actions categorised as ongoing are now sufficiently embedded in the work of the Council and will be subject to alternative oversight and governance mechanisms. And key outputs and impacts to date will be further explored through ongoing assurance by the Lambeth Safeguarding Children's Partnership. And I can assure my colleague that briefings of serious incidents do go to the Cabinet member every fortnight, and they are of course confidential briefings, and they also go to the Chief Executive. One of the key actions in the plan was to host a day of reflection in Lambeth, which took place on the 6th of December 2022. The day of reflection served to preserve organisational memories of past experiences of children in care, as well as to ensure everyone in the council understands their role as corporate parents and safeguarding Lambeth children. Fundamental to this was the participation and voice of survivors with whom we have worked. I thank them again for their courage and generosity in participating and for their engagement, their guidance and their work with us. Mr. Mayor, we know it is imperative that we continuously implement the learnings, that we reflect, and that we learn and commit to ensure that such events never ever happen again here in our borough. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all speakers. We will vote on this report later in the meeting. We will now turn to the Overview and Scrutiny Annual Report 2023-2024, and we will hear from Councillor Nicole Griffiths, Councillor Ben Curtis and Councillor Liz Atkins. Councillor Griffiths, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you to officers and to Councillor Atkins for the report. I've already mentioned that I sit on 2 of the scrutiny committees and about my ongoing concerns about the chairpersonship of all 4 committees being held by the Labour Group. A concern upheld in the report itself. The primary principle that underpins overview and scrutiny in Lambeth is to be independent from the administration and stakeholders. I rest my case, as the scrutiny committees are clearly not independent of the administration. I have further concerns about the makeup of the scrutiny committees and sincerely hope that they will be addressed this year. There always needs to be alternative points of view and objective scrutiny, ensuring full accountability of the administration, officers and all political groups. We are here to serve the residents of Lambeth. Therefore, transparency about process and the involvement of local people is essential. The committees would all benefit from incorporating independent voices, co-optees and laypersons bringing their experience and knowledge to the scrutiny of council decisions and policy. For example, it's good to see a co-optee on the Children's Services Scrutiny Committee, yet there appears to be no young person's voice at meetings. When I was on that committee, a member of the Youth Council regularly attended and their contributions were always very welcome, so I hope this is rectified. The final principle of the scrutiny function is to follow up recommendations. How this works within the council is an area of great concern to me. There have been times when committees have discussed a decision that's already been accepted by Cabinet. What therefore happens to our recommendations on a decision that's already made? Surely it would serve the scrutiny function best if recommendations were brought to the public Cabinet meetings and discussed as part of the decision-making process, thereby illustrating the importance of recommendations that come through the scrutiny process. I urge this administration to open up the scrutiny processes and what comes across as defensiveness and paranoia about being held accountable for their decision-making. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now hear from Councillor Curtis. You also have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Primarily, I'd like to thank Councillor Atkins, the Overview and Scrutiny Chair, Councillor Gadby, the outgoing Vice Chair, Gallup and Oxley, the subcommittee chairs and all the team at Democratic Services for putting this report together. It has, as has been for the 2 years previously, been a very good period for Overview and Scrutiny. My colleagues at the committee will attest that politics is often very much left at the door and members work together to probe the Council's most difficult issues and scrutinise the functions that residents here are most reliant upon. Councillors in this room have heard me harp on about the chair role needing to be done by an opposition councillor countless times, so I won't rehash that. But I did want to outline my disappointment with the events of last summer. For those of you unaware, the Cabinet's decision on a phase of the Somerleyton Road development was called in by some Labour councillors. Now, I'm not going to call into question the decision that the committee made, but I was deeply disappointed by the process by which the meeting was held. The meeting was held in the middle of August at less than 2 weeks' notice. Councillor Atkins, the chair, was unable to be there, as was the vice chair, Councillor Gadsby, and Councillor Griffiths, the only opposition member alongside me. It was only through a stroke of good luck that I was able to actually make the meeting. This isn't good enough and is not a model fit to scrutinise the decisions that are made by the Cabinet. Whilst I commend the broad portfolio of work carried out by the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, or should I say committees, this action left many members, including myself, totally dismayed, actually, to be honest. I hope for the sake of everybody in this chamber that we aren't subjected to more of this lastminute.com politics, not least on a critical issue like that of the Somerleyton Road development. I know this issue has been buried for now. It was condemned to obviously various discussions that happened afterwards, but I do sincerely hope we've learned for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Atkins, you have 3 minutes.
Scrutiny helps hold the council to account, ensuring decisions, especially on the allocation of funds, are more transparent and made in the best interests of residents we serve. It's important that scrutiny is cross-party, and in spite of what opposition councillors have said, in Lambeth that works well. It's how effectively and independently scrutiny is done, not who chairs it, that's vital. Scrutiny is even more important when huge funding gaps demand tough council decisions that weaken local services that local people rely on every day. That's why, whenever possible, we listen directly to members of the public. Their thoughts and their concerns give scrutiny the vital evidence to inform our work and our priorities. We heard from Esther, who told us of the poor response to requests for housing repairs. Appointments were made and missed, days off work wasted. And when workmen did turn up, they often didn't have the expertise or the tools to do the job. We heard from Ione, whose Down syndrome son had a difficult transition from children's to adult social care. He failed to get the consistent support he needed, and she had to retell his story over and over again because of high staff turnover. And we heard from Hassan, who was issued with and had to appeal many parking tickets, even though he had a valid resident permit. Taking that criticism on board, we call on the council to hold our contractors better to account for poor performance, to review the call centre, to institute better handover processes, to ensure better communications, and much more. Knowing that little will really change without more resources from government was frustrating enough. But even more frustrating was scrutinising the performance of partners largely beyond the council's control. Scrutinising the failure of the NHS to close appalling gaps in racial health inequalities, such as in maternal health care and mental health. Scrutinising the failure of the Met Police to root out rogue, sexist, homophobic and racist officers and to just do their job of keeping local people safe and protected from crime on our streets. And scrutinising the failure of Thames Water to invest to stop constant burst water mains and its dumping of sewage into our rivers, putting its shareholders first before its badly served customers. Such abject failures require action, real change at national level if we are to make urgent, badly needed improvements to the daily lives of local people. That's why the election of a new Labour government, which believes in deepening local democracy, offers hope. Hope that after 14 years of austerity politics,
Thank you, Councillor. Time.
And that change will hugely benefit the people of Lambeth.
Thank you. Thank you to all the speakers. We'll vote on this report later in the meeting. We'll now turn to the Corporate Committee Annual Report 2023-2024, and we'll hear from Councillor Scott Ainsley, Councillor Matthew Bryant and Councillor Martin Tiedemann. Councillor Ainsley, you have 3 minutes.
It's really sad to see this committee take a backward step. When I sat on it for 4 years, it appears to be making progress, and it shows the value of having opposition members on committees. Take note, Chief Whip. And I pushed hard to get an independent member onto it, and he offered a tremendous insight on how to manage risk and to govern, bringing years of experience to the committee and adding real value. More interested in texting. It was a great loss that he stood down at, and that the committee has failed to find a new independent member. This report clearly gives very limited assurance that the council has adequate systems of governance and control of risk in place, with only 1 in every 3 internal audit reports giving reasonable assurance. That's 2/3 giving limited or no assurance at all. This really is appalling and must not continue, as it's not a situation any organisation can or should tolerate, and clearly shows Lambeth is not offering proper stewardship of public funds or giving residents value for money. 85 million debt written off for failed Homes for Lambeth, Housing Ombudsman inspection of systematic repair failures and spiralling legal claim costs. Ofsted are overseeing the Children's Services Improvement Board. Ofsted, overall judgment of the service that requires improvement to be good. Now, there is something positive in there. 77 council homes recovered from fraud to rehouse those most in need, saving 2.4 million on temporary accommodation. It would be good, however, if we could speed up getting the 655 voids back online to help more with this problem. And according to your calculation, we could save over 20 million on temporary accommodation. So what's in the risk spotlight? Poor contract management. We've heard from the cabinet member responsible tonight about the demise of Fortum, but it sounds as though they walked away. You didn't decide to do it, and the decision should have been perhaps made a bit sooner, perhaps, rather than waiting till later. We'll never get to know the real facts. That's just the way this siege mentality council's working. Look, what's missing from this report is that there are delays on clarity in matters in the public interest regarding public funds, for example, a legal settlement on contract management regarding education in schools, a long overdue investigation into £170,000 procurement of a housing services contract. Residents and members of the committee are left in the dark about this, and no assurance that lessons have been learned. Hush money paid to leaseholders who are fleeced by this council. Any challenge they get, the cost of maintenance is revised down. Serious youth violence has never moved from being the highest risk tolerance for many years. And it's no longer on the corporate register. Why? Is it because it's too embarrassing that you've not done anything about that?
Councillor, that's your time.
Is that it?
Yeah, 3 minutes.
Oh, it's ruthless you are.
Sorry. Thank you. We'll now hear from Councillor Bryant. You also have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to commend this report to full council this evening. The report sets out the scope of the committee's work during the year. However, the remit of the committee still remains too broad. I've made this point before, and we believe this limits our ability to provide an appropriate level of scrutiny and review. However, one of the most important sessions the committee held during the year was actually an effectiveness review meeting last October, and I perhaps advise Councillor Ainsley to read Appendix C of the report, because there were some very good recommendations in that about how the committee could use its time more effectively, how it could be structured more effectively, and that's something that the new committee under Councillor Spencer should be taking forward, and I hope it will do in the coming year. As a committee, we have actually continued to express our frustration at the lack of progress by the council's management in implementing the agreed actions following internal audit reports, and that is something that in the coming year more focus needs to be applied to. Clearly, where procedures had fallen down or were not being followed, as councillors, we need to know that those with responsibility are actually doing something about it. I'd also like to express my frustration that we have been without an independent member for nearly a year now, following the resignation of Simon Blakeney last summer. I know that all members of the committee valued his input, particularly around risk management, where he brought considerable expertise from outside the council. It's regrettable that the first exercise to recruit a replacement was unsuccessful, and I hope that we can get a new independent member on board as quickly as possible. Finally, in my final comments, I would just like to obviously thank Councillor Tiedemann for his even-handed chairing of the committee during the past 2 years. He stood down from the committee following the annual council, meeting. However, Martin always allowed all the issues to be aired, despite having a huge agenda. I'm sure you won't miss having to try shoehorn 10 or 11 items into 2.5 hours, which always proved to be a challenge. We wish you well, and I endorse this report this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Martin Tiedemann, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is the report, as you know, of the work of the Corporate Committee in the year 2023-24, and the full report is in the council papers, which I'm sure everyone's read. Thank you, Councillor Bryant, for your comments and your view on the report, and thank you, Councillor Ainsley, for yours too. I'm always impressed by how opinionated you can be, having not been at the committee this year. But I hope that we can. There was that one time. You're right. During the final year that I chaired the committee, we continued to provide I think effective challenge to and oversight of the council's internal audit and counter-fraud work, the statement of accounts and risk management. While there have been findings of concern through internal audit and counter-fraud work, I hope where we do see the improvements in services and arrangements, they arise from our work, and particularly that of the staff in the internal audit and counter-fraud team, may underline the importance of internal audit. And we've continued to bring attention to complaints and members' inquiries, and the challenge from the Housing Ombudsman in particular. We recognise the big improvements the team has made in this area, and also the work that remains to ensure our services and complaint handling processes meet residents' expectations. We instigated what I hope is an annual inspection of Russia Common to inform the committee's work in that respect, and reviewed the arrangements of the Tower Hamlets Environmental Trust ahead of registration of funds with the Charity Commission, and hope these will continue to improve. As Councillor Bryant mentioned, one of the most important areas we considered was a review of our own committee's effectiveness, challenging our work and our arrangements. One of the key findings, as already said, was that the committee's remit was too broad, combining too many individual responsibilities. Some of these issues are of massive importance to local communities like Rush Common or Central Hill, but not necessarily concerns for the whole borough. Others, like employment policies, are critical to the function of the council, but disconnected with other work that we do. These items compete for valuable space on the agenda against governance, risk and control arrangements. Members of the committee have to master many areas, and that brings risks in terms of training gaps and lack of expertise. In 20 years as a councillor, chairing this committee was the hardest thing I've ever done. When comparing to our neighbouring boroughs like Wandsworth, Southwark, Lewisham and Croydon, we found the remit of our own corporate committee combined that of 3, 4 or even 5 committees elsewhere. Most had a standalone audit committee that had oversight of that function. So our favoured recommendation is a split of the committee, and the easiest would be to have an audit committee and a separate general purposes and emergencies committee. I began the work for pushing for this recommendation towards the end of the year, including a very long lunch with the majority group whip to discuss it, and I hope changes can be made at the next annual council. There's still much work to be done, including arrangements for Holmford Lambeth, ensuring contract management is as good as it can be, incorporating climate change and emergencies into broader work on risk, and on completing the appointment, quite rightly said, of an independent member of the committee, which we have not benefited from this past year. Thanks again to the officers who support the committee, including Kaya, Paul, Duncan, James and others for their patience and their advice. And thanks, of course, to all the members of the committee, and best wishes to the new committee as they continue their work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all the speakers. We will vote on this report later in the meeting. The final report is the Health and Wellbeing Board Annual Report 2023-2024. We will hear from Councillor Nicole Griffiths, Councillor Donna Harris and Councillor Jackie Dyer. Councillor Griffiths, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and welcome to your new role, Councillor Windle. The goal of decreasing inequalities and the objectives of the Health and Wellbeing Board are very welcome, and Councillor Dixon's introduction is honest about the limitations of what's been achieved. Equally honest is a section on the ways in which problems have increased since 2011. However, we were surprised to hear that after more than 10 years of the board's existence, only now is strategy dashboard being developed. The elephant in the room is always the reduction in and lack of resources to do this work. It's hinted at, but it's never overtly criticised. With a new government, it's time to publicly state what is needed to ensure the board achieves its objectives and goals. The language of the report is very bureaucratic and it's a bit exclusive. The description of the board, its functions and concerns with relationships with other complex structures and functions of the whole local health system. Do these structures mean anything or have any relevance to the lives of most of the people of Lambeth? We also found it ironic that a recurring theme is the need to co-produce, to involve and engage the public in decisions about their health and well-being, yet there seem to be few inbuilt factors to help achieve this. For example, there are no representatives from community groups on the board. Healthwatch is one step removed from the people it serves. There is no one on the board who will not be constrained in what they can say in public by the organisation they represent, and the resident voice is just not heard on the board at the moment. Yet there's a clear desire to involve the community more in decision making, but no suggestion that there should be other lay representatives involved in the board, or that members of the public should suggest agenda topics which they consider important. There's relatively little in the report about the evaluation of outcomes of the board's work, with relationships across the structures evaluated, not the outcomes of the work in reducing health inequalities. It seems to be more about monitoring the members doing the monitoring. For example, case studies of good work being done on the ground would be useful and help bring the report to life, particularly as we appreciate that the long-term and complex nature of public health changes make formal evaluation difficult. More could be said publicly and more bluntly about the need for more resources. After all these years of existence, surely the Health and Wellbeing Board should be able to produce some evidence of evaluation of its outputs, even if the results are disappointing. The tools are being amassed, but don't seem to be being used as yet. We also suggest that the board planning for 24-25 gives more thought to genuine involvement of community groups and activists in key decision making over health matters, which is what real engagement should be about, so that it's not just a superficial tick box exercise. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now hear from Councillor Harris. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to start by thanking Councillor Dixon for his work over the past year, along with the efforts of officers and stakeholders. I'd also like to congratulate Councillor Dixon on his election as an MP for Dartford, and I wish him well in his new career in Kent, as well as supporting this report. However, today's King's speech was desperately disappointing, with Labour omitting any mention of scrapping the two-child benefit cap. How can we give all children the best start in life when this policy is still in place? According to Lambeth's own Food Poverty and Insecurity Action Plan, pre-COVID, 43% of children in Lambeth live in poverty, while 36% lived in food poverty. 22% of children in Lambeth claim free school meals, putting Lambeth in the top quartile nationally. Scrapping the two-child benefit cap would lift 27,000 children living in Lambeth alone out of poverty with immediate effect. There can be no excuses. Lambeth Labour, you must put pressure on your government to remove this policy. The Liberal Democrats are also keen to see serious efforts to tackle problems with maternal health care. 49% of the maternity services are rated inadequate or requires improvement by the Care Quality Commission. That includes the maternity unit at King's College Hospital here in Lambeth. Whilst its maternity survey 2023, the Commission found that women's experience of maternal care had deteriorated over the previous 5 years. We know that we have particular problems with Black and Asian women. Black women are at almost 4 times greater risk of maternal mortality than white women, while Black and Asian babies are far more likely to be stillborn or die within 28 days of being born. We called in our motion back in January this year for the Council to work with the South East London ICB to conduct an improved survey on women's experiences of maternity services, including an independent survey for Black women modelled on the 2022 Black Maternity Experience Survey conducted by 5X More. Labour took that out of the motion. That separate survey needs to be introduced. It would enable us to get to the bottom of what differentiates Black women in perinatal care and thus allow us to provide them with services that meet their needs and save their lives. Finally, while I welcome Lambeth Stamp Charter, it is not nearly enough, as our inboxes are proving still. Too many residents are still badly affected by damp and mould. The 28-day deadline for diagnosing problems must be accompanied by a target for resolving these problems, with particular attention paid to the most vulnerable residents. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Dyer, you have 3 minutes. Councillor Dyer, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor. As the new chair of Lambeth Health and Wellbeing Board, I am pleased to present the Health and Wellbeing Annual Report for 2023-24. Lambeth Health and Wellbeing Board aims to build strong and effective partnerships which improve the commissioning and delivery of services across the NHS and local government, leading to improved health and wellbeing for local people. This has been the first year of our new health and wellbeing strategy, and we are delighted that the strategy has been helpful in influencing the Lambeth Borough Plan 2030, as well as the Lambeth Together Health and Care Plan. The board approved the Health and Wellbeing Strategy 2023 to 2028 at its meeting in January 2023 and delegated the oversight of the implementation plan delivery to the Staying Healthy Board, with regular reporting to the Health and Wellbeing Board. The 3 priorities of the strategy are to ensure the best start in life, to support people to lead healthy lives and have good physical and mental well-being, and to support communities to flourish and build their resilience. And every board meeting over the past year was themed with one of these priorities. Presentations and reports were received and discussed aligned to the theme. Our development session in March focused on how the board was functioning, how we were delivering and upholding the principles of the strategy, and what progress has been achieved on outcomes. In relation to the principles of the strategy, whilst these were generally considered to be upheld by the board, there was a reflection that our anti-racism approach needs to be stronger, given the obvious evidence of continuing poor outcomes for Black people in maternity and mental health services, for example. The joint strategic needs assessment highlighted how Lambeth is changing. For example, there has been a population decline in our under 15s and an increase in our over 65s, and this trend is likely to continue. Whilst we are making progress on many of the activities in the delivery plan, the sad reality is that the impact of cost of living crisis combined with the legacy of the COVID pandemic means that we are seeing inequalities growing and some of the gains of previous years eroded. However, we are also seeing new opportunities, such as bringing our leisure services in-house. While there is a lot of work still to be done, I'm pleased with how the board has helped deliver the council's strategic priorities and brought us closer to providing tangible evidence that we are becoming a borough of equity and justice. And of course, community participation and engagement will be central to our approach going forward. And we will learn from the patient and carer risk equality framework to support delivery of our ambitions for the health and well-being of our constituents. A more comprehensive version of the report can be found online.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you to all speakers. We'll vote on the report later in the meeting. We will now debate the two motions that are listed on the order paper. The first motion is the Liberal Democrats motion on a fair deal on housing. The speaking order is as listed on the order paper. Councillor Harris, you have 5 minutes to open the debate.
Mr. Mayor, we raised concerns about Lambeth's housing strategy in our consultation response last year. The strategy contains promises that look appealing, but get into the detail and you'll find, as per usual with Lambeth Labour, the delivery isn't measurable. The Lambeth New Homes programme promises 500 new affordable homes on land owned by the council by 2030. We have no way to assess progress towards that target. We know what will happen. We'll go to the polls in 2026 on the back of Labour's promises, but by 2029, you'll have found someone else to blame for not achieving them. That's why a motion calls for annual targets. We want to see a target for the number of new homes that will be built each year until 2030, with at least 40% being affordable housing. Whilst the housing strategy acknowledges the difficulties with the definition affordable housing, it offers no solution. Our motion tackles this. Let's set a level significantly below 80% of market rent. Let's talk to residents about what they can really afford and commit ourselves to matching it. We are also calling for the council to commit itself to a date by which at least 50% of its 400 long-term empty homes will be occupied by social housing tenants. And we call in our motion for a timescale for new direct delivery housing development projects. So those are our suggestions to bring accountability to Labour's promises on providing homes. But we can never discuss housing without addressing the dreadful dysfunctional repairs service in Lambeth. It's shocking that in the last 2 years, the Housing Ombudsman has determined 19 cases of severe maladministration and 47 cases of maladministration in Lambeth. Labour should be deeply ashamed of its failures. Those failures disrespect people's rights to a decent home. We are particularly concerned about the residents in need of emergency repairs. It's simply not acceptable that these people, often in vulnerable situations, have to wait in line with everyone else. Our motion calls for two things. First, a new category for urgent crisis, maintenance and repairs, with targets to inspect all urgent cases within 24 hours and works to commence within 10 working days. Secondly, a new dedicated urgent repairs case officer whose sole task would be to progress the most severe cases. That would give councillors a clear point of contact on cases which cannot afford 10 days for a member's inquiries response. Supporting this, we need to change the HMR responsive repair system so that cases are marked as closed only when the constituents' problem has actually been resolved. Finally, we want to direct HMS Responsive Repairs portal with a turnaround target of 3 working days. These are practical suggestions to make things better for people who depend on the council for their home. There are 2 other issues in our motion. First, leaseholders. It's scandalous that Lambeth Council taxpayers have been made to spend nearly £2 million over the last 5 years to stop leaseholders talking in public about their experiences. It's a disgraceful waste of public money, and that must end. The council should never hide its failings ever again by paying hush money. Finally, we want the council to refer itself to the regulator of social housing. Other failing Lambeth councils, Labour councils, around London have done this. Ealing, Haringey and Southwark have all called in the regulator. Lambeth must follow suit to establish whether it has breached the home standard. I note the joint call to the government last week by Lambeth and 19 other councils for significant reform for a cash injection. Let's hope the new Labour government responds generously, but whatever the final financial situation, the council still has choices and it still needs to do better. Enough of Labour's grandiose promises. Please, let's start delivering. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Dalrymple-Hornby, you have 3 minutes.
There we are. Thank you. It's no secret that housing is a challenge for local authorities across the country, and London boroughs such as Lambeth are at the acute end of that challenge. But we don't need the Lib Dems to point out the scale of the challenge. We already know it. For years, 14 to be precise, we've been calling for support from national government to support our work locally to tackle these issues and build more homes, while making sure the financial stability of the council is preserved. Despite the tremendous hard work from council teams to do what we can locally to tackle these issues, we know we need support. We need a national government to understand the difficulties local authorities are facing, and that knows we need to build more to ease the burdens on temporary accommodation, to reduce homelessness, and to give our private renters the opportunity of home ownership. We now finally have that government. But the Lib Dems don't want to talk about that. They want to treat Lambeth in isolation, ignoring the context and making political attacks to feed into their own narrative of the challenges we face and how we solve them. But actually, the Lib Dem motion doesn't match their narrative in this chamber as little as 5 months ago. They claim they want increased scrutiny on housing, yet in their budget they wanted to scrap what is now my position as Chair of Housing Scrutiny, or at least not pay someone to do the work they clearly think is needed. To complement the political leadership in this space, we have excellent Deputy Cabinet members who know the challenges and can support in the practical steps we take to address them. The Lib Dems wanted to scrap them too. The Greens agreed on this, but went one step further in wanting to scrap one of our deputy leaders, although to be fair, they didn't specify whether they'd scrap our climate lead or our housing one. But all that aside, our Labour administration has a real opportunity with this new Labour government to put these challenges at the heart of government decision making, tackle the 14 years of managed decline from the Tories and Lib Dems, and continue to deliver for Lambeth's most vulnerable. I urge colleagues to reject this performative motion tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Chowdhury, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It will never cease to fascinate me that the Lib Dems, after helping to create the toughest financial environment we face as local authorities, now seek to lecture this chamber about how we should solve the issues they co-created. It is no secret that housing is a major challenge for many boroughs, and Lambeth isn't immune to that. But given certain performances at the general election hustings from opposition members, I'd suggest this motion speaks to their ambitions for themselves in May 2026, rather than resident need by 2030. They completely fail to recognise the complexity of the issue and that how we deal with housing is also underpinned by our commitments to so many other things, such as tackling the climate crisis locally. Strange that this motion makes no comment on how we do this. Not even the Green Amendment discusses this, apart from a small note about retrofit, something we're already delivering on. Mr. Mayor, under this Labour administration, the Council has completed social energy efficiency improvements and retrofit projects on several of our social housing estates. We fitted new windows, external wall insulation and solar panels in over 1,000 properties, with 24 deep retrofits being completed on Myattsfield Estate and new projects starting in Blenheim Gardens, Tivoli Road and Caldwell Gardens this year. Strange that they didn't mention any of this. The contrast between what you say in here and what you do out there is pitiful. This administration is focused on making the progress we can for the most vulnerable in our borough. There is nothing progressive about the opposition groups that routinely fight against development. They have no idea on how to deliver climate and social justice in partnership and fail to recognise the challenge in front of us. Performative politics is all they have to offer. They set out actions that will always come with a financial cost, but made no comment on this in their budget earlier in the year and how this would be accounted for. But then again, Lib Dems always play fast and loose with council finances. Their track record in government speaks for itself in this regard. And interesting that you want to use quotes from Michael Gove about inaction on housing. We know he's an old colleague of yours, but really? If ever there was an example of inaction, it is his time as Secretary of State for Housing. And now we have a new Labour Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government. Yes, you heard right. No more posturing around levelling up. And importantly, local government is back in the title where it used to be and should have been remained. We now have a government on our side who will support us to build more high quality, well-designed and sustainable homes and create places that increase climate resilience and promote nature recovery. In conclusion, Mr. Mayor, Lib Dems offer us nothing new but opposition for the sake of it.
Councillor Gillipour, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was hoping this evening we'd have the opportunity to have a serious discussion about housing and building new homes. But sadly, instead, the Liberal Democrats have put forward a motion that is simply petty and point scoring, that does nothing to highlight the challenges we face or indeed the solutions we are attempting to put in place. Lambeth, like the rest of London, is in the middle of a housing crisis. We have over 40,000 people on our housing waiting list, and every single night, over 4,500 families are living in temporary accommodation. This is a housing emergency and it is a moral tragedy. And we are passionate about doing everything that we can to address this. Despite the challenges we have faced over the last 14 years, with our budgets being repeatedly cut, at the same time as housing demand has continued to increase, we have made some positive steps by building the first new council homes in a generation, by overhauling our housing repairs contract, and by publishing a new and radically ambitious housing strategy. Don't get me wrong, there is still much more that we need to do. And this is precisely why we have published our New Homes programme that sets out exactly how we're going to turbocharge delivery of new affordable homes on land that is owned by the council, with a minimum target, and I stress minimum, of 500 new homes by the end of the decade that are affordable, with a focus on as many of these as possible being social housing. And when it comes to repairs, we've recently set up our Community Works team, an in-house repair service so that we are not solely reliant on outside contractors. And the response from residents to this service has been overwhelmingly positive. But again, we know there is more to do, and the repairs are the number one concern of our tenants. That's why we have dedicated so much time and resource to overhauling this service and putting a new management team in place. And even the Housing Ombudsman has noted there has been a very real transformation in this service and a new culture of accountability. So I'm happy to fill in these gaps in the Liberal Democrat motion. But what I despair of more than these omissions is the deliberate collective amnesia from the Liberal Democrats about the part that they played in creating the housing conditions that we face today. For who was it who appended families in Lambeth by imposing the bedroom tax on them? Who was it that withdrew the funding schemes to get new homes built? And who was it that embraced a culture of austerity that has decimated local government finance to this day? On all of these things, the Liberal Democrats embraced them with relish to support the Conservatives, and they were only stopped when the electorate brought down the sorry edifice of the coalition government.
You would hope that at least they would apologise for the terrible mistakes that they made and show even a minimum amount of contrition. But no, instead, even last year at their conference, they embraced a project of NIMBYism. I'll finish with this one sentence, Mr. Mayor. We have a new Labour government now, and we are ready, shovel in hand, to build the new homes that our residents need. Thank you.
Councillor Griffiths, you're up next. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This Lib Dem motion names many elements of a housing system purposefully broken under the Tories. Yet, for me, it fails to examine some very fundamental issues, many of which have been mentioned this evening. Public services that serve the people, such as education, council housing, a welfare state, and the role of politicians as public servants have been so eroded over the past 14 years, I fear we've reached a stage where we fail to notice just how much we've incorporated Tory rhetoric into the everyday without question. In the education sector, we now have a whole mix of types of school, watering down the concept of a fair for all state education. In housing, not only do we have a nation encouraged to constantly strive towards home ownership, more often than not on land that someone else has ownership rights of, a concept that fails to serve so many people, especially in Lambeth, we've ended up trying to work with ill-considered detrimental policies such as shared ownership and the right to buy, with the concept of affordable housing and rhetoric that normalises homelessness. We've come to rely on expensive sticking plaster solutions such as temporary accommodation provision that feed poverty and oppression. Instead, let's talk about investing in families and council housing at social rent, secure tenancies, low energy, sustainable, socially priced homes. Let's talk about equality and justice in the housing and land ownership sector, about rent controls and the end to Section 21 evictions. We welcome the legislation mentioned in today's King's speech that supports renters' rights, ends no-fault evictions, and that will reform leaseholds and ground rents. Yet, voice concern over the Planning and Infrastructure Bill, which fails to address the history and multiple issues that have brought the refurbishment, building and provision of council housing at social rent to a halt. Lambeth's new housing strategy promises to improve the supply and sustainability of new homes, to use existing assets that will continue to promote and support the delivery of homes at both social rents and London living rents. It's all good stuff, but I'm worried about promises made by this council to build homes when there's no money to do so. There appears to be no understanding from the Labour group of what is or isn't affordable, and they continue to work with developers who refuse to include social housing in the developments that they build. The statutory requirement to provide accommodations for families and individuals when there isn't any available has created a totally unacceptable set of challenges, purposefully brought about by Tory policy over the years. For example, the brazen support of landlords and developers, so housing benefit ends up in private hands. As a priority, we urge this council to urgently refurbish and retrofit empty properties so they can be used as accommodation for some of our 4,645 families in accommodation. Thank you.
Councillor Bryant, you have 5 minutes to close the debate.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As our motion states, having a roof over one's head has long been considered a fundamental right that everyone should have. Access to safe and secure accommodation is a hallmark of a civilised society. And from talking to fellow councillors across this chamber, housing is the #1 issue raised by our constituents. But it goes much further than that. We know that housing affects all areas of our lives and our residents. Families in poor quality housing have worse health outcomes. And we know that children in poor housing do less well at school. We welcome and endorse many of Councillor Griffiths' comments, and there's much in the amendment from the Green councillors that we agree with, particularly the importance of retrofitting on regeneration estates. However, we do not agree with the changes that they are proposing to the targets for new homes and feel that these are not realistic. And it's for this reason we cannot support their amendment to our motion. Now, Councillor Adenpour made some mention that the housing policy adopted by the Liberal Democrat Conference last September was NIMBYist. A frequent comment he seems to like to make about Liberal Democrats. I should like to remind him of actually the track record of Liberal Democrat administrations on house building and bringing dwellings into use. Indeed, Liberal Democrat Sutton, in Liberal Democrat Sutton, 2,440 new homes were completed between 2018 and 23. That's more than in Lambeth, despite Lambeth being about a third larger in terms of population. And within Sutton, there were over 120 new council homes during that period, against a figure of precisely 0 in Lambeth. Then further afield, the Liberal Democrat administration in South Cambridgeshire has overseen over 6,000 net additional dwellings over the same time period. So let's not pretend that Liberal Democrats oppose house building. What we want is more dwellings, whether newly built, repurposed, or brought back into use, of appropriate standard and affordable cost, supported by the right level of services. If you do that, if you provide housing that's relevant to local needs and affordable to the community, then objections will melt away. Now, from the comments of previous speakers, it looks as if Labour councillors have obviously been whipped into voting against our motion. But I find it hard to understand why councillors would oppose something as simple as having a separate category of urgent repairs and employing somebody as a dedicated urgent repairs case officer to look after them. We all of us deal with these urgent repairs on a weekly basis, and we see how left not given the priority, those issues become a more serious housing problem for the tenants in our areas. This is about protecting the most vulnerable in our community. It's just about good administration. I also fail to understand why Labour would not support a focus on bringing back into use the 400 long-term empty homes, particularly in light of the current pressures on temporary accommodation. That's 400 families currently accommodated and residents often a long way out of the borough, managing the stress of trying to keep their schools and their children in a Lambeth school, but having to manage increasingly long journeys from their temporary home to the school that they attend. Now, Councillor Adenpour also sort of mentioned that this implied that our motion is petty point scoring. It's neither. Simply what we are pointing out is certain areas where we feel that the council can improve its performance. He also mentioned the financial situation. However, we need to remember that the castration of the housing revenue accounts occurred after 2015, after the Lib Dems were actually in government, particularly the rent capping that was applied by central government, which is the thing that has most significantly affected the funding available to our council, councils up and down the country through the housing revenue account. However, Councillor Harris mentioned that there are 66 times, 66 in just 2 years, that Lambeth has been subject to a finding of maladministration or serious maladministration. That's 66 separate occasions that the council has fallen far below the standard that the Ombudsman has seen fit, and the Ombudsman has seen fit to intervene and declare maladministration of one level or another. In addition, the council has been subject to his first in-person inspection by a housing officer. I'll bring my comments to a close. Councillor Holland in her cabinet statement says the time is about to change.
So it's finished. Sorry.
We don't change, but change begins at home.
Sorry,
In the
Councillor.
home.
Councillor, your mic is off. You have to stop. Sorry. Thank you, Councillor. Thank you. We now move on to debate for the Labour motion on building on the success of 1 year of active Lambeth. The speaking order is listed as listed on the order paper. Councillor Spencer, you have 5 minutes to open the debate.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the opportunity to propose this motion. Anyone that knows me knows that I like to stay active, and I'd like to talk about it. Whether that's lobbying colleagues to join me on a cold morning for a park run, even being kind enough to let the mayor beat me at the finish line just so he could preserve his pride, or spamming people with pictures from my many bike rides. It's clear physical activity is a big part of my life, although this wasn't always the case. Just over a year ago, it was incredible to stand with colleagues here in Brixton Rec as we launched Active Lambeth alongside former Olympian Chris Akabuski. As a massive awkward fangirl, I shared with him in detail my favourite athletes and my Olympic predictions, and I'm sure he remembers that conversation as well as I do. To be able to stand here after 1 year of Active Lambeth and reflect on its success should be a real moment of pride for colleagues across this chamber. The importance of staying active cannot be understated. In England, around 64% of adults aged 18 and over are estimated to be overweight or living with obesity. The prevalence of this is highest among the most deprived groups in society. Children in the most deprived parts of the country are more than twice as likely to be living with obesity than those in the least deprived areas. The cost of this to the NHS is huge, but also to the cost to the individuals and their own quality of life. It is a complex issue, but one which in many cases can be prevented when the right work is done in the right places. There are so many barriers which prevent so many people from participating in physical activity, and seeking to remove these is something Active Lambeth do on a daily basis. We know, for example, that by age 14, girls drop out of sports at 2 times the rate of boys. The reasons for this range from lack of access to facilities, cost, as well as social stigma and self-confidence issues. So I'm proud to see the majority of Active Lambeth members are women, and over 8,000 people aged 25 and under are using our services. As a young girl, I didn't excel in any sport at school, and so very soon dropped out of doing any sport and exercise. Like many young women and girls, I wrote myself off because I wasn't sporty, and exercise thereafter played little to no role in my life. For many years, I had no regular or positive relationship with any kind of sport or exercise. Eventually, in my adult life, I did persist, and I put myself way out of my comfort zone, discovering physical activity and stuck with it. And I can't express enough the positive impact this has had on my own physical and mental health. And Active Lambeth has played a role in this too. For a long time this year, I was down at the rec centre using the pool on a very regular basis, going from only being able to swim 2 lengths whilst having trouble breathing to reaching my goal of 2 kilometres. It was a very long journey, and I'm sure it kept the lifeguards entertained. And for those of you who think that Councillor Robson is looking great today, we were down at Active Lambeth a few days ago and joined a body pump class together in Clapham, and I didn't force him there, that was his own free will. Exercise isn't about being sporty or about being the best. It is fundamentally about participation, socialising, and how it makes you feel. Sweating like mad as you plodded along at the back of a park run, or completing an aqua aerobics class with a friend, it gives you that sense of accomplishment. And we all have a right to that feeling, and to feel that sport and exercise belongs to each and every one of us, regardless of ability or our starting point. When we made the decision to bring the Council's leisure services back in-house in April 2023, we committed to providing an enhanced offer of concessions for residents across the borough. The take-up of these concessions has included nearly 10,000 free swimming lessons for children up to the age of 11, nearly 2,700 concessions for those over 66 years of age, 238 concessions for children in care up to the age of 25, and 177 active health concessions for overweight and obese children, children in receipt of free school meals, and adults with defined health conditions. The benefits of residents being more healthy and active is enormous. Whether this is savings and a reduced need for healthcare and mental health services, improved well-being, or generating social value through enabling residents to participate in fun and healthy sports and activities. My hope is that we as a council can continue to support our residents of all backgrounds and demographics to realise that sport and exercise isn't the preserve of a sporty or gifted elite, but it's for all of us in whatever shape that takes. And I hope we can take the learnings and success of Active Lambeth so far and share them with others, lobbying for more inclusion on a national level. And if we can get Chris Akabusi down here, I'm sure we can persuade Lisa Nandy to come and do a few lengths at the rec. I urge colleagues to vote for this motion tonight. Thank you.
Councillor Curtis, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Mayor. The health of constituents is, of course, a top priority, and healthy living means active living. And as life expectancy grows across Lambeth and across the UK, it's all the more important that we support active leisure for older residents too. And of course, healthy lifestyles ease the pressures on the NHS as well. We're certainly not opposed to the concept of bringing services in-house if that saves money or allows for a better service. But the launch of Active Lambeth in April 2023 was, as we said at the time, a shambles. This was an opportunity for the council to show residents what it could do for them. Well, they saw what the council could do. It could and did cost them more, while also causing them further confusion, frustration, and missed opportunities. It reduced their services, and those aged between 60 and 66 lost their senior membership. Those working outside the borough lost access to services near their places of work. Unsurprisingly, Active Lambeth was another example of high-handed centralisation, of Labour doesn't listen, or Labour promises big, delivers small, late, or never at all. Residents across the borough contacted me and other councillors to complain. As an example, Badminton tariffs for over 60s rose from £6.20 an hour to £14.09 an hour. That's more than double. How does that help elder residents to remain active? And how does that help Badminton to maintain sustainable levels of participation? That redefinition of senior membership from the over 60s to the over 66s harms those in the first years of retirement, when it's so crucial to help people start new habits in order to keep their fitness levels up. What the council has done with Active Lambeth is to bring in-house some meaningless and non-comparative metrics. We need to know, has participation gone up or has it gone down? Are the services being used by a wider range of communities, including hard-to-reach groups? And do people actually like the services they're getting? That's why we're calling for, in our amendment, a full statement of comparative prices under GLL and under Active Lambeth. We're calling for these statistics on the take-up of services broken down by demographics, so we can assess what impact Active Lambeth is having and whether its benefits are actually truly accessible to all. Fundamentally, we're calling for transparency. I find it rather difficult to believe that anyone would want to oppose that. I assume there's nothing to hide. We want to see membership benefits that were enjoyed under the GLL contract restored, and particularly for older residents. We must reverse the redefinition of senior members from 60 to 66. That's quite simply age discrimination, the removal of a service provider of existing benefits on the basis of a person's age. As such, I would actually think it breaches the council's own commitment. In paragraph 4.2.e of the Constitution, it enshrines to ensure the services as are accessible as possible, while standing in tension with the statutory requirements under the Equalities Act of 2010. We're also calling for Active Lambeth to employ more female lifeguards and staff members to ensure women-only sessions are available at all centres. Equitable access, regardless of race, religion or gender, should be, of course, without question. Finally, we're calling in our amendment for a restoration of another benefit that's been lost. We want to see reciprocal arrangements with neighbouring boroughs to make sure that people who live here in Lambeth continue to enjoy the benefits that they used to enjoy under the GLL contract, even if they work elsewhere. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Ainsley, you have 3 minutes.
I've systematically failed to keep from you tonight that I brought the wrong specs. That's why. Look, if this is a motion that your new constitution chooses to debate, then someone used performative earlier on. I think this is it. Look, there's nothing wrong with celebrating, but I don't think we deserve a motion around this. If Labour was truly earnest about deciding what is relevant for debate, what a waste of time. Perhaps they should review your own submissions. This is predictably absent of lessons learned or commitments to monitor or improve service. It's completely meaningless. This is a completely meaningless exercise in self-promotion. The Greens have been calling for Lambeth to bring leisure services in-house for many years and ultimately agree that there are many potential cost savings to the council and improvements for residents. However, the fumbled transition has resulted in a great deal of work left to be done on this front. During the handover, residents were exposed to confusing and excessive price changes, membership disruptions and malfunctioning apps and booking systems. Possibly worst of all, as we've already heard, was the decision to increase the age of eligibility of senior concessions from 60 to 66, cutting off many users from the previous discount. There are also ongoing inequalities in Active Lambeth, again, as we've heard, that need to be addressed. Women's sports teams are reporting unequal access to training facilities due to prioritisation of men's teams. Poor maintenance of accessible bathrooms have meant facilities are unusable for wheelchair users. The council needs to initiate a review of the Active Lambeth strategy and determine its progress towards its outcomes and equality impacts, as well as making recommendations on how things can be improved to make access fairer across the borough. This should, of course, be done in consultation with residents and adequate monitoring. Without this, the Active Lambeth strategy risks being yet another one-step process which will eventually devolve into chaos and need complete overhaul. This motion blames the previous government for austerity measures that have starved council funds. Well, who will Labour blame now when there is no change in the pre-existing Tory fiscal policy under their own leadership? And if the default presumption of this council is success without scrutiny, how can residents ever expect best practice in the council's policy making? As ever, the sound of the backslapping that occurs in this chamber is enough to drown out the voices calling for real and genuine accountability. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Issa, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for allowing me to speak in a favour of this motion. Active Lambeth being brought in-house has allowed this council to go further for residents from a variety of different backgrounds in supporting them into healthier lifestyle. And as colleagues mentioned, this has incredible long-term and positive impact on their well-being and health. But what I'm most proud of is how we manage to champion our work as a borough of sanctuary to provide free Active Lambeth membership to asylum seekers here in our borough for 12 months. This is a matter close to my heart, as I know from personal experience the importance of inclusion in activities, social hubs, and improved well-being for those finding sanctuary in our borough. But make no mistake, it was this Labour administration who planned and delivered this. The Lib Dems seem to think that the motion last year in July brought this about, and they took credit for it when it was announced the following month in August 2023. This decision and the work behind them take far longer than 4 weeks, and the Lib Dem knows this. They were told when drafting their motion last year that this was already planned, but they went and sold a lie to residents Lambeth anyway. I think it is shameful that the way they have done this and continue to try and do this in their amendment to this motion. This goes beyond a cheap political point scoring. We are used to that from the Lib Dems, but it's an insult to the hard working of Sanctuary Services team who spend months of working with Active Lambeth team, our cabinet members and others who delivered this real important piece of work. And for you to put a statement in the press claiming that it was you who was responsible for it, it is offensive to us here and many out there who don't want the support for them use or to exploit it for political gain. I'm glad this motion calls for us to campaign to increase for uptake in this free membership. And I want to say a huge thank you to those council teams who have already gone into the hotels and signed refugees up and have even gone as far as contacting those households outside the borough, informing them of what we can offer here in Lambeth. I urge colleagues in the chamber to vote in favour of this motion and amend it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McGivern, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the opportunity to speak on this motion tonight. Members will be aware that I have spent much of this year in recovery after an accident, and much of that recovery has taken place in community physio at our very own Brixton Rec. And I have seen firsthand how Active Lambeth is bringing people together from all ages and from all walks of life. The link between ageing, health and activity couldn't be clearer. Healthy habits and physical activity throughout life can help prevent and reduce conditions that lead to poor health outcomes and disability in later life. It can shorten time in hospital, hasten recovery, increase independence, and reduce reliance on long-term care. A key manifesto commitment of this Labour group is to make Lambeth the best place to grow old and the best place to grow up. We've committed in the borough plan to become an age-friendly borough, a place that enables people to age well and live an active and healthy later life. Now, whatever you might have heard from the opposition tonight, let me be very clear. The first year of Active Lambeth has shown clear delivery on this commitment. Yes, we did raise the concessionary age in line with the state pension. We've done that so that we can provide more support and a wider range of concessions, supporting older people where it will make the biggest difference. Concessions for people of all ages with health conditions improved by physical activity. Free sessions for those with 2 or more long-term health conditions provided by Age UK. A 65% discount for gym and swim classes for people with disabilities, the vast majority of which will be older, and up to 100% discount on weekly activities for people with seen and unseen disabilities. We've also launched Active Seniors, a new programme of classes, activities and concessions tailored for adults aged over 60. And we've created more social spaces for residents, combating loneliness and social isolation that can affect health and well-being. And we've done this because Lambeth Labour is on the side of our residents, young, old and future old. And after 14 years of Conservative decline that has left them poorer, in worse health and has actually lowered life expectancy, they deserve nothing less. And with respect, I'll take no lectures from the party that ushered that in. It is by delivering on manifesto commitments like this that we do the best we can for our residents in Lambeth. Not just one electoral cycle, but for decades to come. And I call on all members to vote in favour of this motion tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Anyanwu, you have 5 minutes to close the debate.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Having listened to Councillor Ainsley and Councillor Curtis, I'm absolutely disturbed because I don't think they had a clue about what Active Lambeth does and what it's doing. My colleagues have already mentioned about concessions, including variation of concessions we had. I just came from Warwick University, where my colleagues and counterparts were talking about leisure, sports, activities, and health and well-being. Every single speaker and people who presented today, and including tomorrow, pinpointed the work we've done in Lambeth in relation to Active Lambeth. This is LGA group activities. We were chosen as the best to be referred to and the best to be learned from. I'm sorry, officers, you have a lot of calls. If our opposition members sitting over there don't see the benefit of what we've achieved in 1 year, bringing the service in-house, others nationally can see the benefit of it and giving us credit of what we have done. So shame on you on ignoring what works for Lambeth residents. Henry said clearly when we brought these commercial activities in-house. So we will have challenges, we will have hopes. And those hopes have been realized in relation to what colleagues mentioned in relation to how we opened up Active Lambeth to residents and additional services that we included in 1 year. When GLA was managing the Active Lambeth, Lambeth was paying them 600,000 a year to manage the service. We promised that we will gain from bringing it in-house level of 1 million. At the point of, I'm talking to you up to last year, this year, it was nearly 2 million. So we made a profit in addition to the concessions that we have given. I stand here to say to colleagues, vote for this motion that completely turned the service around, that is giving our residents the health and well-being that we promised. We promised in relation to our borough plan. We promised that we will make a place where individuals will grow happily old and where individuals will be happy to live in. Active Lambert is a mark of what this borough can achieve and what Lambert Labour committed to achieve in our manifesto, and we're achieving it. If you are jealous about it, that is your problem. Our problem is to deliver to the Lambert residents, and Lambert residents know why they continue both the by-elections and the general election, have confidence in this Labour Lambert. An active Lambert is an example of what we can do for our people, and other people are listening and copying what we want to achieve. Thank you for officers who have brought this and make it work. Thank you for individuals who have assisted me and colleagues who have worked with me, and including our Active Lambert Partnership Board, which includes schools, which include national bodies and local bodies, chaired by me, of course, however, co-chaired by London Sports and Sports England. The confidence they have in us through what we achieved in Active Lambert is why they are working with us in partnership.
Thank you,
Why they
Councillor.
see, Mr. Mayor, that we're working with our public health,
I'm going to ask you to
NHS,
stop,
and
Councillor.
other bodies to make our people active and healthy. Thank you, everybody. Vote for this motion.
Thank you, Councillor. So thank you, councillors, for the debate on each of the motions this evening. We're now going to move on to tonight's voting. We will begin with voting on the reports listed on the agenda. If there is no dissent, the recommendations will be carried. If there is dissent, we will move to a vote. You have three choices: voting for, voting against, or abstain from voting. Tonight, we will be voting by a show of hands. Starting with the Constitution. Are the recommendations in the report agreed? No? Cool. So we'll now move to a vote by a show of hands. Please raise your hand if you're voting for. Please raise your hands if you're voting against. Please raise your hands if you wish to abstain. Thank you. The recommendations in the report are agreed. The second report is the review of allocation of seats. Are the recommendations in the report agreed? We will now move to a vote by a show of hands. Please raise your hand if you're voting for. Please raise your hand if you're voting against. Please raise your hand if you wish to abstain. Thank you. The recommendations in the report are agreed. The third report is the IICSA Action Plan. Are the recommendations in the report agreed? We will now move to a vote via a show of hands. Please raise your hand if you're voting for. Please raise your hand if you are voting against. Please raise your hand if you wish to abstain. Thank you. The recommendations in the report are agreed. The fourth report is the Overview and Scrutiny Annual Report 2023 to 24. Are the recommendations in the report agreed? We will move to a vote via a show of hands. Please raise your hand if you're voting for. Please raise your hand if you're voting against. Please raise your hand if you wish to abstain. Thank you. The recommendations in the report are agreed. The fifth report is the Corporate Committee Annual Report 2023-24. Are the recommendations in the report agreed? We will move to a vote via a show of hands. Please raise your hand if you're voting for. Please raise your hand if you're voting against. Please raise your hand if you wish to abstain. Thank you. The recommendations in the report are agreed. The final report is the Health and Wellbeing Board Annual Report 2023-24. Are the recommendations in the report agreed? We will move to a vote via a show of hands. Please raise your hand if you're voting for. Please raise your hand if you're voting against. Please raise your hand if you wish to abstain. Thank you. The recommendations in the report are agreed.
Mr. Mayor, I think you've missed out the key special urgency.
What is that? It's not here. It's it's for noting. Okay, cool. Thank you, Councillor O'Hara. Wait, wait. Cool. Yeah. Thank you. We now move on to voting on council motions. The council will first consider motion 1 from the Liberal Democrats on a fair deal on housing. There's one proposed amendment to this motion from the Greens, and we'll vote on the amendment first. Is the amendment from the Greens agreed? We will move to a vote via a show of hands. Please raise your hand if you're voting for. Please raise your hand if you're voting against. Please raise your hand if you wish to abstain. The amendment from the Greens is not carried. As a result, we will now vote on the original motion from the Liberal Democrats. Is the original motion agreed? We will move to a vote via a show of hands. Please raise your hand if you are voting for. Please raise your hand if you're voting against. Please raise your hand if you wish to abstain. The original motion from the Liberal Democrats on building on a fair deal on housing is not carried. Council will now consider motion 2 from Labour on building on the success of 1 year of Active Lambeth. There are 2 proposed amendments to this motion from the Greens and the Liberal Democrats. We will vote on the Green amendment first. Is the amendment from the Greens agreed? We will move to a vote via a show of hands. Please raise your hand if you're voting for. Please raise your hands if you're voting against. Please raise your hand if you wish to abstain. The amendment from the Greens is not carried. Is the amendment from the Liberal Democrats agreed? We will move to a vote via a show of hands. Please raise your hand if you are voting for. Please raise your hands if you're voting against. Please raise your hands if you wish to abstain. The amendment from the Liberal Democrats is not carried. As a result, we will now vote on the original motion from Labour. Is the original motion agreed? We will now move to a vote via a show of hands. Please raise your hand if you're voting for. Please raise your hand if you're voting against. Please raise your hand if you wish to abstain. The original motion from Labour on building on the success of 1 year of Active Lambeth is carried. Council will now consider motion 3 from the Greens on to accelerate local climate action. There is one proposed amendment to this motion from the Liberal Democrats. We will vote on the amendment first. Is the amendment from the Liberal Democrats agreed? We will move to a vote via a show of hands. Please raise your hand if you're voting for. Please raise your hands if you're voting against. Please raise your hands if you wish to abstain. The amendment from the Liberal Democrats is not carried. As a result, we will now vote on the original motion from the Greens. Is the original motion agreed? We'll move to a vote via a show of hands. Please raise your hands if you're voting for. Please raise your hands if you're voting against. Please raise your hands if you wish to abstain. The original motion to accelerate local climate action from the Greens is not carried. Council will now consider motion 4 from Labour on backing a transformative 5-year plan for LGBTQ+ rights and bringing pride home to Lambeth. There is one proposed amendment to this motion from the Greens. We will vote on the amendment first. Is the amendment from the Greens agreed? Is agreed? No? We'll move to a vote via a show of hands. Please raise your hand if you're voting for. Please raise your hands if you're voting against. Please raise your hands if you wish to abstain. The amendment from the Greens is carried. Cool. As a result, we will now move to the vote on the motion with the green. What's it called? What's it finished? Yeah, cool. Cool. So we'll now move on to a vote on the amendment as amended, on the motion as amended by the Greens and proposed by Labour? Cool. Is the motion agreed? Agreed. We'll now move to a vote by a show of hands. Please raise your hands if you're voting for. Please raise your hands if you're voting against. Please raise your hands if you wish to abstain. So the substantive motion as amended by the Greens and proposed by Labour on backing a transformative 5-year plan for LGBTQ+ rights and bringing pride home to Lambeth is carried. Council will now consider motion 5 from Labour on smartphones in schools. There is one proposed amendment to this motion from the Greens. We will vote on the amendment first. Is the amendment from the Greens agreed? We will move to a vote via a show of hands. Please raise your hand if you're voting for. Please raise your hands if you're voting against. Please raise your hand if you wish to abstain. The amendment from the Greens is not carried. As a result, we will now vote on the original motion from Labour. Is the original motion agreed? Okay, cool. The original motion on smartphones in schools from Labour is carried. So that concludes the business for this evening's council meeting. Thank you all for your attendance and participation tonight. The next council meeting will be on the 16th of October. Good night.